2018 afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Carla, please call the roll.
Fish.
Here.
Saltzman.
Here.
Udaley. Fritz.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. And now a word from our sponsor.
Thank you. Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so that everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony or on resolutions, or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on, and when your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations, will not be tolerated. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Very good. Thank you. Good afternoon, Carla.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Could you read item 424, please?
Yes. Adopt the fiscal year 2017-18 spring supplemental budget and make other budget-related changes.
Colleagues, the proposed spring supplemental budget allocates $7.2 million compensation set-aside funds for bureaus who experienced full staffing throughout the course of the year and require their budgeted cost of living adjustments. It allocates $2.8 million in general fund contingency resources for urgent needs and incurred costs, such as providing reimbursements for labor costs incurred by bureaus this year and reimbursing the Bureau of Transportation for an enhanced level campsite cleanup costs which were incurred during this year. It also allocates funding to support the Creative Laureate position and helps send the Portland Gay Men's Chorus to China. The proposed budget processes program carryovers totaling $8.7 million, which will be rebudgeted to support program continuation in the fiscal year 2018-19 budget. In total, these changes will leave a balance of about $493,381 in the city's unrestricted contingency account for urgent or unforeseen needs during the remaining 2 months of the fiscal year. The proposed budget also increases city staff by 53.15 FTE with non-general fund resources. Increases are primarily in the Bureaus of Transportation and Development Services to address increased workloads paid for through increased Bureau revenues. Joining us today is the City Budget Office Director, Andrew Scott. Director Scott, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Andrew Scott with the City Budget Office, and good afternoon. I think we have a relatively quick action before us today. The Mayor has outlined some of the overview major issues within the spring supplemental budget. Just as a reminder, this is the opportunity for bureaus to true up their budgets for the current year, to ask for carryovers, compensation set aside, and other requests. We did have a work session on this spring supplemental budget on April 17th, and we went through a number of these packages in detail, so I will not recap those, but I am happy to answer questions about any packages that you have. In addition to what the Mayor talked about in the compensation set-aside requests and the new requests and carryovers, just as a reminder, there is about $600,000 coming back from the Bureau of Emergency Communications as underspending from last year, and then about $3 million of additional state-shared revenue related to marijuana. I do want to note specifically the Mayor talked about the 53 positions being added in this supplemental budget. And he mentioned the transportation positions. I also want to mention that within OMF, they did request position authority to convert 3 temporary revenue collection positions to permanent. These positions work on arts tax collection and are funded by OMF's requested increase in the arts tax administration budget. This is an issue council had previously dealt with, but we didn't talk about it at the work session, so I did want to mention that. And the other thing I want to mention, just to specifically call out, it is in the ordinance language, but OMF is requesting a one-time temporary change to the fund statement of purpose for the Spectator Venues and Visitor Activities Fund. This is specifically related to a request for the city to contribute $500,000 to the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and I believe it's the sound shell work that needs to happen there. That fund's statement of purpose does not currently allow the authorized payments for capital improvements. However, the fund does have sufficient excess capacity in the current fiscal year, or I'm sorry, actually in next year's fiscal year, to pay up to $500,000 to assist with that electronic acoustical system in the Schnitzer, and it is in the city's interest to support and assist Portland 5 with the cost of that capital improvement, so they are requesting a one-time change to that fund statement of purpose to allow that expenditure to go forward next year.
So it automatically, the statement goes away automatically after 1 year?
Yes, this would,
Yeah.
it would just, it would just change the statement of purpose for this one expenditure, but it wouldn't change it on a permanent basis. So, and we do have Susan Gibson-Hartnett here if you have additional questions about that particular provision. Outside of those things, I do believe there are a few amendments that commissioners may want to bring forward. I think you have copies of those amendments. And so if there are any questions on what was in the mayor's proposed spring supplemental, I'm happy to answer those. And if not, we can move on to amendments.
Very good. Why don't we put amendments on the table? Colleagues? Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you, Mayor. I've handed out the 3 amendments that I have. One was in the requested bump, wasn't funded, but I'm proposing to put it back in. That's Amendment 1. Increase Bureau expenses to Portland Parks and Recreation from the general fund by $100,000 to convene and run the Street Tree Task Force. Funding is provided from a drawn general fund unrestricted contingency, and it updates exhibits 1 through 5 as needed to reflect this change.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fritz. We have a second from Commissioner Fish on Amendment 1.
Thank you. The second is a new amendment on behalf of Portland Parks and Recreation to increase the Bureau expenses from the general fund by $40,000 one time to support dedicated rangers for Director Park. Funding is provided from a draw on general fund unrestricted contingency, and update exhibits 1 through 5 as needed to reflect this change.
I'll second.
There's a motion from Commissioner Fritz, a second from Commissioner Saltzman on Amendment number 2.
And if I could just briefly explain that. We are unexpectedly, and I just found out about this a week or so ago, having a lot more difficulty with graffiti and minor criminal behavior, as well as overnight camping at Director Park. And so this funding would allow for hiring of seasonal rangers to provide more security and also assistance to people using Director Park. And finally, Amendment 3 is spotted by my eagle-eyed Chief of Staff that the bump did change the money for the open and accountable election system. However, it did not change the positional authority. So Amendment 3 has a technical adjustment, increased positional authority in special appropriations by 1.0 FTE. Positional authority was approved by Council in the Office of Neighborhood Involvement via Ordinance 188872 on March 21st, 2018. This amendment will move the position to special appropriations. Funding for this position is being allocated to special appropriations via a transfer from the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, and it updates Exhibit 1 through 5 as needed to reflect this change.
Second.
Commissioner Fish seconds Commissioner Fritz's Amendment number 3.
Concludes my amendment. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. Colleagues, I have one amendment that I'd propose as well. Decrease program expenses in the Portland Housing Bureau, this is general fund, by $1,250,000 for the Joint Office of Homeless Services, and set aside funds for program carryover and allocation in the fiscal year 2018-19 budget. These funds were previously approved by the Council for shelter costs in the fiscal year 2017-18 fall supplemental budget, but the resources are not expected to be spent before the close of this fiscal year. This would update Exhibits 1 through 5 as needed to reflect this change.
Second.
Commissioner Fish seconds what we will call Amendment Number 4. Any further amendments?
Well, I guess that's a question.
Please.
Yeah, Commissioner Fitz, your Amendment 3, it's a lot of words here, but is it still keeping 2 positions in the open and accountable elections? Bottom
Yes,
line?
well, this is the first of them, yes. So we're not messing with the other, well, not changing the other one just yet because we don't need it.
Okay,
But yes.
okay, thanks.
Very good. And I've got, I want to note that we also have Mark Jolin and Christian Ulkin here from the Joint Office of Homeless Services. So if people had specific questions about that, Director Scott, sorry, could I get a little more clarity on the amendment that I've put forward for the record? This is for shelter capital costs, and they were not expended during this fiscal year, so we were requesting that they be carried over to the next fiscal year, and that has been done in discussion with the Joint Office of Homeless Services.
That's exactly correct, Mayor.
Is there anything else I should be saying?
No, it was funded in the fall bump, and this is just to carry over those funds to next year for the same purpose.
Very good. And it is expected that we will need these funds, but we were not able to expend them this year because, frankly, a shelter we were working on did not come to pass.
That is my understanding, yes. I would note, just for the record, that of the 4 amendments, two for the Parks Bureau spend general fund dollars, and the remaining contingency, if those amendments were adopted, would stand at approximately $353,381.
Very good. So I had a couple of questions, Commissioner Fritz, just for clarity, and I'm sorry I missed the work session related to the street tree task force, but I'm certainly familiar with the issue. And I guess my question is this. This is for the purpose of convening the task force. It would be supportive of an FTE to help administer that task force. Is that correct?
Catching me unawares, but yes, I believe so. I know that part of it is for a contract.
For a correct, I'm sorry, for a contract. My question is this. We have certainly read press accounts about the difficulty that certain residents are put in, particularly if they are next to a large forested area. And there was one article earlier this year that told this story about a family that's lived next to what they believe to be a large green space for many, many years. And along comes a storm, and they found out that they had a personal liability, private liability, for a substantial cleanup. And so part of the process here is to try to address that issue. And that certainly makes really good sense to me. The flip side of the equation is that, and having gone back and reviewed the record, and I think Commissioner Saltzman raised this question during the work session, is the reality that if we do a broad scale, effectively, a public acceptance of that liability for all of the street trees, it's substantial. And I think the number 750 million was being bantered about. I would only be interested in supporting this if I had confidence that there is a scaled approach to this that doesn't encumber us with the entire liability of all street trees in the city of Portland. And I'll give you an example. I live on a street where I have 2 street trees that I am currently responsible for. I'm aware of that responsibility. I don't prune it without appropriate clearance to do so. I take good care of it, and I assume that liability. I don't believe that the city should assume that liability. On the other hand, the kind of story that we read about in the Oregonian, I totally get that. And so I'm wondering, does this create the opportunity for a scaled approach where we assume the liability in limited circumstances like the one that was described in that particular narrative? Because I know ultimately the work of a task force comes back to the council for approval, but I don't want to mislead anybody on that committee into thinking that I would ever support a broad-scale public acceptance of a liability that the city frankly isn't in a position to assume. Does that make sense, or do I need to
It does,
clarify
Meth. I'm laughing for two reasons. First of all, such is the force of your personality that I would have sworn you were at the work session, because I've gotten so that I can hear what you're saying in my head.
I don't know if that's a good thing or really
I
scary
know.
thing.
I'm really quite concerned about it. And second of all,
I may need to
time
get
out
you
right now.
I
We're
may
gonna
need
do
to
time
get you
out.
help for this.
well, second of all, anybody who's seen the proposed budget would not suspect that you would be up for funding hundreds of millions of dollars in the Parks Bureau. So I don't think we need to worry about that. To be serious, however, yes, that's what the task force is going to look at. And actually part of what I'm quite interested in is the work of the consultants to tell us what other jurisdictions do. But yes, I think it would need to be made very clear by whoever is the Parks Commissioner when this gets going, is that, don't come to us with a single option of $750 million because we don't have it.
Right, and I wouldn't support that.
No,
and
neither.
I just want to be really honest about
Yeah.
that up front, so people don't serve on a task force and then get disappointed when they come back and feel that their work was disrespected.
And remember, this was asked for by the Urban Forestry Commission, who likewise are familiar with the challenges of funding tree programs over many years here in the city of Portland, and who advise on our budget requests, or the Bureau's budget requests.
Very good.
Mayor, may I make a suggestion?
Commissioner Fish.
So we don't know how quickly this will be convened, and you have also indicated that at some point in the next 6 months, there may be Bureau changes and various things. This doesn't just impact the Parks Bureau. It's conceivable that Bureau of Environmental Services has an issue here. And then there's obviously a general fund and potentially other sources of hits. So what I would just, I would offer this as a friendly amendment, but I know that this is how Commissioner Fritz would intend to roll this out anyway, which is that if we approve this, that at the time of putting together a task force, that the Bureau touch base with each office as to the scope of whatever the task force is going to be asked to do, and the composition of the task force, which I would expect Commissioner Fritz to do in either case, but I'll just put that on the record.
Well, I think when the mayor hands the Bureau to whoever he hands it to, that could be a stipulation.
Yeah, but so the scope, the particular scope of the work of the task force and the composition of the task force and even the leadership in terms of who chairs it can all be discussed among council members.
Well, Commissioner, I know that you and I have found over the years that when we do things collaboratively between the five of us and have input early in the beginning to set the scope and get the membership, things tend to go better. So certainly, if I do have the honor of leading this project, I would be happy to do that.
Okay.
Let me ask a related question to that. Maybe this is just a thinking out loud moment. The Parks Bureau has a lot on its plate right now. It has the cost recovery program. It'll have the capital program. There's some ongoing visioning and strategic planning. Is this the right year for this? Or are we pushing the Bureau too hard to do too many planning exercises simultaneously? Do you have a sense of that?
I envision that the Urban Forestry Commission and its supporters will be very active in this. And it's getting an outside consultant to help with the analysis. So I think it can be done in parallel. But if we're looking at the long-term financial sustainability of the Parks Bureau, the cost recovery and the visioning, then how do we pay for street tree maintenance, I think should be part of that. And so I think this could be complementary.
Very good. And with regard to Amendment 3, and Director Scott, I'm probably looking more at you for this. I just want to be very clear, given the technical nature of this amendment, there's not a funding request. This is actually a positional authority.
That's
just
correct,
to be
yeah.
perfectly clear.
Yes, this is as you described, a technical change. We realized, and actually Commissioner Fritz's staff realized that although council had approved earlier, in this bump, we are moving the funding for the open and accountable elections to special appropriations. There was previously a position that had been authorized in the Office of Neighborhood Involvement that had not been moved, and so we wanted to make sure that it was moved along with the funding.
All right,
That's
very good.
really all it accomplishes.
All
No
right.
additional money, no changes.
Correct.
Any further discussion, colleagues, or are we in a position
Do we have to take public testimony on
That's a
this?
good question. Stand by. The answer is yes, it is an ordinance, so technically we do. Public testimony, Carla, on these items?
No one signed up.
Last chance. Colleagues, can we call the roll on amendment number 1? Commissioner Fritz's amendment 1 with regard to the Street Tree Task Force. Please call the roll.
Fish.
I appreciate the discussion on this, and I look forward to learning more about how other cities have addressed this issue with a mix of carrots and sticks. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
As I mentioned at the work session, I can't believe I'm advocating quite so hard for this because I think it is something that's going to be really challenging and potentially give us no particularly good outcomes. However, it's something that previous councils have kicked the can down the road multiple times on, and I do believe it's my responsibility to advocate for this, and then whoever is the Parks Commissioner to go ahead and get the work done. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment's adopted. Amendment number 2, and this is the increasing expenses by $40,000 to support dedicated rangers and directors park. Please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
I very much appreciate my colleagues responding to this very late request. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment's adopted. Amendment number 3, this is the technical positional authority amendment. That's as exciting as I could make it sound. Sorry, Director. I'll try harder next time. Please call the roll.
Fish.
Mayor, you did an admirable job of obfuscating what this is all about, what this particular amendment's about. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
I think I must win the prize for the geekiest amendment, and I'm very proud of that. Aye.
Wheeler.
Hands down, aye. The amendment's adopted. Amendment 4, and this was the one with regard to the carryover of the allocation to the Joint Office of Homeless Services. Please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment is adopted. To the main motion. Please call the roll.
Fish.
Well, this is where we get a chance to thank a number of people for bringing us to this point, and I want to start with our independent budget office. There's actually a lot of work that goes into these bumps, budget modification processes. There's a lot of consultation that goes on with members of council, and there's a lot of money moving back and forth and being tracked. But Andrew and his team always manage to make this look smooth and easy, and so we appreciate the good work. I appreciate the collegial spirit in which the council reviews these recommendations. First the requests, then CBO's views on the request, the mayor's proposed, and then the amendments. It has become a much less, let me put it this way, this process has become less dramatic than it has been in the past, because I think about the way we approach it, and I am proud to support this particular reconciliation. Aye.
Saltzman.
Thank you to the Budget Office for all your work. Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
There's one other item I just wanted to call to everybody's attention, and this is a whopping $5,000 which Commissioner Fish put in for the
Creative Laureate.
Creative Laureate. And it was brought to my attention by Sue Park, the Parks culture manager, arts and culture manager, that this is for 2 years. And that's even $5,000 seems like not a lot of money for the amount of work that our current cultural laureate is doing. So Commissioner Fish, if and when you're on the council again next year, I hope you'll bring back an annual appropriation for this amount. In the meantime, I'm very happy to support it, and thank you for your leadership on that program. Aye.
Wheeler.
Great work, everybody. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted as amended. Thank you. Thanks, Director Scott. Next item, please, 425.
Do we have is that a time certain?
3 o'clock, time certain.
Take a little break.
Oh, look at this. We should have talked a lot longer, told jokes or something. That would have been great.
I did my best.
All right. We are adjourned until 3 o'clock.
Thank you, Dave.
please read item 425.
Appoint new members to the new Community Involvement Committee as provided in the 2035 Comprehensive Plan for a term to expire April 30, 2021.
So, colleagues, as Carla just said, we're happy to confirm these 7 candidates to the new Community Involvement Committee. The candidates are Claire Carter, Isa Dean, Alexandra Dager, Beth Rubin, Jai Singh, Sandra Walden, and Christina Weinholz. I think we have, is Sarah Wright going to? Yes, there's Sarah, right there, front and center. Do you want to come up and introduce the CIC for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So Chapter 2 of Portland's new comprehensive plan calls for the creation of a CIC to oversee the city's community involvement efforts for land use and transportation planning projects. And as Mayor Wheeler said, these appointments are the first members of the new Community Involvement Committee. So Claire Carter retired in 2017 from ODOT after a 32-year career as an environmental professional. Her formal education includes a BS in geography and a bachelor's master's degree in landscape architecture with a special emphasis on community involvement in design. She and her family have lived in Southwest Portland since 1999. Isa Dean lives in North Portland and has served on the Humboldt Neighborhood Board, the PCC Bond Advisory Committee, and currently the RAC Artist in Residence panel for the Humboldt neighborhood. She is the Regional Technology Coordinator in the North-Northeast region for Multnomah County Library. Alexandra Dager started working at HP Inc. after receiving her PhD in Environmental Engineering from Oregon State University. She is on the Overlook Neighborhood Association Board, where she serves as Transportation Chair and Board Secretary. Beth Rubin has recently moved to Portland and is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. An interdisciplinary scholar, before her retirement, she directed the PhD in Public Policy program and held positions of Professor of Sociology, Organizational Science, and Public Policy, and Adjunct Professor in Management. Jai Singh is a field organizer at Apano. Jai recently graduated with a master's degree in Urban and Regional Planning from Portland State University and is also a proud 2016 graduate of the Opal Environmental Justice Oregon Organizer in Training Program. Sandra Walden lives in downtown Portland. She has worked as a realtor and developer in the Pearl District, solar developer, and also for the wireless industry, building and modifying telecommunications sites. She's been an active participant in neighborhood associations and the Downtown Business Association and has a longstanding interest in urban planning. Christina Weinholz lives in Portland with her family. She graduated from the City of Portland's Disability Leadership Academy in 2017 and remains active in alumni activities. She's also currently a member of the Resolutions Northwest Facilitation Cohort. So we're pretty excited to bring these 7 people on board for this brand new committee because Chapter 2 of the 2035 Comprehensive Plan lays out a set of ambitious goals and policies on community engagement. And this new CIC will help advise staff on how to make those work in real life and how to continuously learn, adapt, and refine practices for meaningful, inclusive involvement.
Very good. And are any members of the committee proposed candidates here today?
I don't believe so.
And I know we extended the invitation, and sometimes it's very, very hard for people to take time off, but I appreciate your taking the time to go through and read a little bit about the biography of each. Colleagues, I don't know if you have any questions. If not, I'd entertain a motion.
I move the report.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fish, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Don't recall the last time we had so few men on a committee, and I'm looking forward to seeing the work they do. Aye.
Wheeler.
Well, I want to thank all of those who are stepping forward to serve on the CIC. It's a very important and new venture for the city of Portland. And as I always say, the work will be hard, it will be interesting, and the pay will be lousy. But we're always delighted to have people of such caliber step forward and serve the people of this city. I vote aye. The report is adopted. Thank you for being here today.
Now we have to adjourn again.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, we do. Yeah, so we have to, we have 4 time certains today, which is confusing, so we have to adjourn until 3:15. We are in recess.
All right.
426, please, Carla.
Suspend system development charges for parks and recreation, environmental services, transportation, and water for the construction of accessory dwelling units that are occupied by the property owner or have a rental agreement subject to ORS 90, the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act.
Very good. Commissioner Udaley.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to move to consider an amended version of the resolution. It's been distributed earlier. The amended version directs a new approach to enforcement of the policy. Old language has strike-throughs. New language is underlined in copies of the resolution that was previously distributed.
Second.
Thank you.
We have a motion for, and is this actually a substitution?
Yes.
So we have a motion for substitution, and this comes from Commissioner Udaley. It's seconded by Commissioner Fish.
Commissioner Udaley, for the purpose of people at home, could you just read into the record the additional, not the changes, but the be it further resolved that you're adding? So that people know.
Be it further resolved that the council further directs the Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services Revenue Division to administer short-term rental covenants associated with SDC waivers for ADUs, develop a fee schedule and budget for administering STR covenants, collect data annually about rents charged to ADUs that receive SDC waivers, enforce violations of STR covenants, and present a biannual report to council regarding the volume of SDC waivers granted and rental rates at ADUs that receive SDC waivers. The Revenue Division will begin administering STR covenants within 120 days of receiving STR data from the STR platforms. If Portland Housing Bureau or another city bureau begins collecting rental data that includes rents charged by landlords, the rent data collection function and biennial reporting requirement will transfer to that bureau. That's it. Okay. So, hello, everybody. The Systems Development Charge Waiver for accessory dwelling units has had a powerful impact on the market. Since the waiver was originally approved by the City Council in 2012, development of ADUs has dramatically increased from roughly 50 a year to 500 a year. This resolution directs SDC charging bureaus to extend the waiver. It does not include a sunset, but it does direct that a biennial report about the policy be presented to Council. That report will enable future councils to evaluate the ongoing efficacy and necessity of the ADU SDC waiver. The other significant policy change that this resolution directs is that recipients of SDC waivers will be required to sign a covenant barring them from listing their property on short-term rental platforms. This policy is designed to support the development of long-term rentals, not commercial development. This resolution represents a first step in a multi-step strategy to help Portlanders meaningfully engage in solving our housing problem. Some of our next steps include, or my next steps include, working with my colleagues to fund a project that will develop a lending product which will enable moderate income homeowners to finance ADU development, as well as bring down the cost of developing ADUs with off-the-shelf designs, tenanting assistance, and other strategies. We will also be including ADUs in the field issuance remodel program at BDS. That will significantly decrease the time and headaches associated with permitting ADUs. And we will be exploring a limited property tax abatement for ADUs that are affordable to people earning 60 to 80% of median family income with our partners at the county. Government alone can't solve the housing crisis by itself. People in Portland want to help. More than 800 people signed up for a Multnomah County pilot program to host a homeless family in their backyard in an ADU built by the county. If we help create the right combination of incentives and market supports, Portlanders will step up to help us solve our housing problem while developing new sources of income for themselves and building wealth in their homes. Growth does not have to be a win-lose proposition for Portlanders, but it clearly has been. The rising tide of prosperity is leaving out many longtime Portlanders. A significant number of homeowners as well as renters are struggling to keep up. A recent Oregon Center for Public Policy report indicated that 24% of homeowners in Oregon are cost burdened. I believe the number is significantly higher in the city of Portland. If we don't do this work, I'm worried that our approach to infill will only benefit affluent homeowners and developers. So we need to just develop strategies that enable as many Portlanders as possible to benefit from the city's growth and prosperity and the coming residential infill policy changes. We need to do everything we can to harness market forces to produce more affordable housing. ADUs are not going to solve our housing crisis alone, but they should be a significant part of our comprehensive strategy. I'm going to stop there and invite staff and some local experts to testify. We have Matt Wickstrom, Senior City Planner with BDS. Robert Liberty, Director of the Institute of Sustainable Solutions at PSU, and Eli Spivak, owner of Orange Spot LLC. Welcome. Please state your name for the record.
Matt Wickstrom, Bureau of Development Services. And what I'd like to do is quickly walk through the resolution with you. And I'll just start from the top and go, just kind of give you a summary of what the different components of the resolution are. So as Commissioner Udaley said, the resolution is to suspend SDC fees for ADUs that are not rented as accessory short-term rentals. And there's language in the ordinance that speaks to how ADUs contribute to the housing density and housing stock in Portland, therefore, which can have an impact on affordability overall. Then there's language in the resolution that just speaks to accessory dwelling units in the Portland zoning code and how we regulate them. It notes that the SDC fees for ADUs do present a substantial barrier to homeowners just because of the proportion of the costs the SDCs are in comparison to the overall project value. And then we outline that the intent of this resolution is not to allow the SDC waivers for accessory short-term rentals. And then as far as the now therefore be it resolved, the council would be asking the bureaus that charge SDC fees to return to council with a proposed amendments to Portland City Code that would extend the SDC waiver program so that it's no longer temporary. I understand it doesn't have a sunset date, but it would be reevaluated on a biannual basis. And then after that, it speaks to that there would be a penalty for those who do rent, who are found to have rented the accessory dwelling unit as a short-term rental while having also taken the SDC waiver. And the time period that the ADU cannot be rented as a short-term rental is 10 years, and the penalty for renting it within those 10 years would be 150% of the SDC fee at that time. And then finally, the resolution speaks to the Revenue Bureau being the bureau that would monitor accessory short-term rentals on Airbnb and HomeAway websites. And if they do notice that one that received an SDC waiver has been listed on those sites, they would notify the SDC bureaus, and then they would pursue collection of the waived SDC fees at that 150% rate.
And we have Thomas Lanham here, Director of Revenue Bureau, if anyone has questions about the enforcement piece. Thank you. Mr. Liberty.
Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, I'm Robert Liberty. I'm the Director of the Institute for Sustainable Solutions at Portland State University. First, I want to disclose that I've begun work on a basement ADU in our house, and if we are tardy in submitting our application, then we will personally benefit from the extension of the waiver. Since August of 2016, our institute has been making substantial investments of faculty, student, staff time, and cash to the tune of $140,000 on a project to promote accessory dwelling units and to have them achieve affordability, equity, and sustainability objectives. Our ADU project has engaged PSU faculty from architecture, business, economics, geography, gerontology, and Urban and Regional Planning. We've worked with the staff at your bureaus of Development Services, Housing, and Sustainability, and we're grateful for the support we've had from Commissioner Udaley. Participants in our project include nonprofit housing providers, for-profit developers like Eli Spivak, financial institutions, and neighborhood groups. They're shown in Appendix A, although I probably have omitted some. We're collaborating to design, to help implement and to evaluate a variety of public, private, and nonprofit systems, and I want to emphasize this point, systems, to A, greatly increase the production of ADUs in Portland, have ADU meet the housing needs of Portlanders of modest means, expressly those between 60 and 80% of median area household income. C, mitigate some of the displacement caused by gentrification and achieve related equity objectives. And D, use ADUs to help achieve some of the city's sustainability goals, particularly around greenhouse gases. There are a range of challenges to be overcome if we were to realize these goals, and a partial list of those challenges and our approach to them are provided in Appendix B. As part of the foundational work for these efforts, our institute commissioned a survey of more than 500 Portland ADU owners and tenants, carried out toward the end of 2017 by Professor Matthew Gephardt and PhD student Yale Kidron. The survey confirmed that your waiver of SDCs has been an essential contributor to the growth in ADU applications, which have risen, as Commissioner Udaley has said, from a few score to more than 500 in recent years. When asked, quote, did the system development charge SDC waiver influence your decision to apply for an ADU permit? 70% of the respondents said yes. That response is not surprising, given that 15% of the ADUs built by the respondents cost less than $50,000, and another 31% cost between $50,000 and $100,000. Adding $15,000 in SDC charges would translate in a cost increase of between 15 and 30%. Some additional excerpts from that survey about the use, rents, and types of ADUs, and given in the context of some Portland data on household and home size, are attached in Appendix C. In conclusion, the SDC waiver is essential to allow ADUs to continue to make a very important, and I would add distinctive, contribution to Portland's housing supply. They are not like apartments, and they're not like single-family homes. I look forward to our continued work with the city to find ways for ADUs to make Portland a hometown once again, where people of modest means can find a good quality home to live in across the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners and Mayor, my name is Eli Spivak. I am a developer, general contractor. Although I'm not wearing that hat right now, I serve on the Planning Commission, and there will be some accessory dwelling units involved in the upcoming residential info project. How it lands, I'm not sure where that will be yet. But I spoke 9 years ago in support of waiving system development charges to City Council. Things have changed a lot since then, and Portland should be commended for going with that experiment. We've been a national leader in accessory dwellings. Just last month, 11 jurisdictions around in the region are all coming together with metros convening to adopt their own accessory dwelling unit codes to stimulate the market, not just in Portland, but in cities all outside of Portland. The state of Oregon now requires every city to allow an accessory dwelling unit. California requires it now, and Washington, D.C.'s making changes. It's happening across the country. Portland is looked to as a leader in this world. And although Portland has been a leader in the number of ADUs created, that's short-lived. Los Angeles just, based on the state requirement, legalized ADUs, and they got 1,600 permits issued in a few months. So we're not going to be the leader in numbers anymore, but we can be the leader in policy. And I think that the system development charge waiver was a key stimulus, and it's appropriate. I support the resolution that disqualifies short-term rentals from that waiver, but I think we should remember the benefits of accessory dwelling units beyond affordability. in terms of capital A affordability. We're actually restricting tenants based on their income or the rent level. One of them is that even a market rate accessory dwelling unit is by far the least expensive house in a neighborhood, oftentimes half the rent, even at market rent. The demographic match is perfect for our demographics we have right now, where there's aging population. The big population booms are in people retiring and getting smaller households, downsizing, and young people forming households for the first time. ADUs are a perfect match for either end of that continuum. ADUs also represent a way to reinvest in existing neighborhoods in such a way that you accompany existing houses or repurpose existing bedrooms rather than take down houses. Many ADUs, even unregulated, are rented for zero or almost nothing to family members or loved ones, just to provide some independence and act as a safety net that people can do on their own. And the thing that originally got me invested in the ADU world was environmental benefits. Just having smaller space of house to condition decreases the climate impacts of living in a city. I was really excited by the brilliant suggestion from, I think it was Commissioner Fish's and Todd's office of, if we're going to provide this subsidy, why don't we get some data out of it? And I know it takes a lot of work for ISS and others to collect data from owners. So collecting rent data is one great idea. I could think of some other data I might also want to collect from SDCs in exchange for getting the waiver. Perhaps we can talk about that later to inform our decision making. But I think that going forward, the great thing Portland can lead on that's not being done anywhere else in the country is figuring out ways that less affluent people can create ADUs. Because right now, to do it, you need to have $50,000 or $150,000 in your back pocket or have a lot of home equity to build one. So it's great for the person who rents it, who lives in it, but it still takes a certain level of affluence to create one in the first place. And what Portland can do with new financial products, where there's frankly a market gap, perhaps some property tax abatement assistance, is to help make creating them more available. And if we want to achieve affordable, like regulated affordable housing and accessory dwelling units, there are some tools we could look at, like a waiver of your limited property tax while you have someone low income living in the ADU. Or if the city provides some financing, do a waiver on interest payments during the time that someone who's income qualifying lives there at a low rent. So there are some tools we can explore. And we know, though, that from other cities that have linked accessory dwelling units to regulated affordable housing, it's turned out to be a poison pill, intentioned or not. So I hope that Portland does look for new ways that we can stimulate affordable housing in ADUs and look for some of the financing things that ISS is working on with Craft 3 to be a leader in that way as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question for Eli. I know that you do cottage cluster developments. Why should an accessory dwelling unit that is 800 square feet not pay SDCs, whereas a building in a cottage cluster that doesn't happen to be an ADU, but it's 800 square feet, why should there be a difference in how much they pay SDCs?
I think that, well, Portland doesn't allow cottage clusters now, at least in the way.
So aren't we?
What did you say?
Are we not going to in the new infill?
I'm sort of juggling my hats here. The discussion draft doesn't add cottage clusters in the way you increase your density for smaller homes. They would allow accessory dwelling units to accompany primary homes in plan developments. So that may be a good question to ask, to jump in when we get there. I mean, it's a fair question of whether, I mean, the prime question here is, should accessory dwelling units get a benefit and not pay towards city infrastructure resources? And I think that it is a subsidy for accessory dwelling units. That's why I wanted to outline the other policy reasons why the city has been and I think should continue to encourage them. I said a few years ago that the best approach would be to waive the fees until we scale down SCCs all based on home size. And Parks Bureau has done that. Other bureaus have not. So I guess that gets to, it's a fair policy question. I think that if you have, in some cities that allow cottage clusters, they usually allow them up to about 1,200 square feet, which really gets a 3-bedroom size. And at this point, though, Portland has this accessory dwelling unit animal that is capped at 800 square feet, or 3/4 the size of the main house, which is a bit smaller than what most cottage clusters are allowed.
Mr. Liberty.
An addendum that might address some of the interests of Commissioner Fritz. The survey showed that 41% of the units were under 500 square feet. An additional 28% were 500 to 700 square feet. 43% were interior, at least 43% were internal conversions. So, well, I should say garage renovations, basement renovations, and a certain share are attics. The other thing that Eli mentioned is looking at both rents and home costs. The average home price, single-family home price in Portland is about $400,000. If you need 20% down payment, that's $80,000. If you want to build a $150,000 ADU, you need $150,000. That's one of the big challenges. Another is, my background is in land use policy, but I now have to become a developer in order to do this, and that is a tremendous burden. And so making it as easy to build an ADU as it is to get solar panels, something that Inhabit's working on, I think, is also critical. Finally, the rent information we have, and Eli has alluded to this, both from the 2013 survey and our survey, shows a lot of the units are charged below market or no rent to family or friends. And the rent range we have from the survey is pretty much close to the range of what would be affordable to 60 to 80% of median family income right now. Now, not all of them, and we don't have the breakdown, but it means that the policy interventions available to the city might be pretty inexpensive for the people in that market range. That's what's a very interesting experiment. And this is the private sector is building the units, and then nonprofits, the homeowners themselves who own the ADUs, and government together maybe just need to provide a little bit more, plus some information to make that a significant supply. That's what's really exciting about it. And we do all that, we also get big greenhouse gas benefits out of it.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know how many houses you'd be allowed to build in a cottage cluster scenario, but one of the arguments for me in support of ADUs is presumably we're going to allow people to build 2 ADUs when RIP comes, one in the basement and one either attached or detached. That's really just adding 1 or 2 units onto an existing home, relatively small units, and in many cases, bringing the number of residents on that property back up to more historic levels, because our single-family neighborhoods are, in general, less dense than ever because people are having smaller families and there's not as many multi-generational households. So I'd say, you know, the difference between adding 1 or 2 ADUs and adding 6 individual homes on one lot is significant, and that would be my justification of waiving SDCs for ADUs versus cottage clusters.
Well, it depends, though, on the zoning and on who's benefiting and who's burdened. So there's I'm going to be bringing to council in the next few weeks transfer of development rights from the community garden at Thomas Cully Park, where Sabin Community Development Association is developing a cottage cluster on an R3 zoned property right next door. Okay. 16,000 square feet. They're going to do 10 detached homes. And I think it's going to be a wonderful development. So that's what they're trying for. That's single-family homes going to be at affordable rents because it's Sabin Community Development Association. Now, admittedly, they'll get a different exemption. But I think if we should be looking at like with like and just looking at how does growth pay its way? Because all these people who are going to be living in these accessory dwelling units, particularly if you've taken your backyard to put the accessory dwelling units in, they're going to need a park to play in somewhere nearby. And how does that, if we have the philosophy which we've had for many years, thanks to the urban growth boundary and the Metro 2040 plan, that growth is going to pay its way, how does this jive with that?
Let me answer a technical question first. The cottage cluster you just described there is a multifamily zoning. So they would pay a reduced impact fee compared to single-family homes because you just pay lower rates per unit in multifamily than you do in single family. And if the residential infill project folds in a cottage cluster provision, as City Council has asked them to do, that would be an example of a cottage cluster provision within single family zoning, where SDC rates are at a step higher. So I think that the development you're thinking of, even if it weren't a nonprofit sponsor, if they actually have to pay the SDCs, they'd be paying at a lower rate. I'm building 2 projects right now that are multifamily zoning. Effectively, you might call them a cottage cluster, but they're outside of what the residential infill project would be doing because it's zoned multifamily. To your main point, I think that there is, I mean, I want to give you credit for it's correct that we like to pay as we go for infrastructure stuff, for uses. And I think I'm going to sort of listen to what Commissioner Udaley said about in many of our established neighborhoods, population density has gone down, and ADUs are a way of bringing the population up to what was there beforehand. And that those impacts have been paid for by prior owners investing through property taxes or however it was before we did system development charges to create some parks. And this has been a stimulus strategy that's been effective. I think we still achieve good public policy benefits from accessory dwelling units appropriate to the small level of subsidy we provide to them through the SCC waiver program. But I take your point. I mean, it's a good point.
Isn't it true that the accessory dwelling units have mostly been done in higher income neighborhoods? So it's the people who are already homeowners who are then getting this break, and it's the only 0.9% of them are in East Portland, and that's the place that most needs the system development charges to build up the system.
That's why we need our loan product.
I would say that, first of all, having people, and I would say it's not wealthy people building them, it's people with a lot of home equity. They may or may not be wealthy. Wealthy people don't need them. So people with home equity are investing that in something that's providing housing supply. Now compare that strategy to relying on a housing bond for a different population at $200,000 each. I think you're creating supply that you can then use in a way that benefits the community. Without that, it wouldn't exist. And I believe without this waiver, a lot of those units would not have been built. Now, you're questioning about is it fair and how is the burden distributed to pay for infrastructure is a good one. And I think that's why the sunset clause or the review period is appropriate to look at that and decide, is it fair? Are we getting the results? If in 2 years you saw the same pattern and there wasn't a change in how they were used, then I think it's going to be a legitimate question.
But that's the point of this sunset, and it's a hard sunset. And I would suggest that the evidence shows that it is not only not fair, it's not equitable. The places that have been benefiting, the areas of town, are the more affluent areas, the ones with more homeowners, and the places that really need the system development charge money to build capacity in the system are the ones that continue to need
Aren't
the
the beneficiaries the tenants rather than the owners?
I think we've gotten way off track here. I mean, so we're going to just all of a sudden ignore the fact that we have a policy that promotes new development and opportunity areas? The equity lens here is who's being served, not the geography in which they're being built. And the reality is that we have a strong preference in our policies for encouraging development with our limited toolkit, which is either carrots or sticks, in areas of high opportunity. To call that inequitable goes against the whole notion of opportunity.
Some of the neighborhoods where you're seeing most ADUs built are very expensive and have been very resistant to upzones. And this seems to be the most politically palatable way of getting smaller, more affordable units in those communities.
Let me offer an analogy.
People can afford to live there.
No one here would say that it is inequitable to give a tax abatement to someone who wants to put a fancy development in an affluent area that produces, under inclusionary housing, a percentage of units that are set aside that are affordable. We'd actually say that that's the best possible outcome because it's in a high opportunity neighborhood with good infrastructure, close to schools, with transportation, and we're now actually expanding choice in giving people a choice in where they're going to live. So the notion, my guess is that there's less ADUs in East Portland, as Commissioner Udaley was just alluding to, because of the cost barriers. And as you pointed out, Professor Liberty, you know, these, it's not like buying a house, we put 20% down. You know, you actually probably have to have the full 150 or find some way to finance it that's different. So I don't buy the argument that it's a failed policy or inequitable simply because East Portland isn't fully participating. I think that points to other barriers of entry that we can address by having different financing mechanisms that encourage neighborhoods that don't have the same access to capital to build accessory dwelling units.
But actually, if you when we drill down, it does, because taking less system development charge money from one group of developers increases the assessments required from the remaining pool of applicants who then are not building those. And that's particularly the case in the utilities. So we're required to replace funding that we don't take in when we waive SDCs.
Well,
and so that's going to have to come from rates for your bureaus.
Let's be clear. One of the reasons one of the number of reasons why I'm not opposed to this policy is it actually has a very modest impact. It has an extremely modest impact on the rates. I wish they were being built to scale to such a point that we could have the debate about whether it's putting pressure on rates. But what we're trying to do is still prime the pump. If and when the pump is primed, we can talk about whether it needs to be sunset. Professor Liberty.
If I may, with regard to the distribution of the units, I think one of the things that happened not concurrently with the recovery from the recession, the waiver of the SDCs, and some changes to the regulatory requirements is Portland became a hot destination for tourism. I mean, I never would have imagined 20 years ago to see tourists, wealthy tourists from mainland China, going to Division Street to eat at fancy restaurants. I mean, that was inconceivable. So those neighborhoods became very attractive for high returns, which some people use to finance their ADUs. When there is more knowledge and opportunity in financing, I think the ADUs built in outer neighborhoods, which are not as desirable as a short-term rental location, and some of the housing is actually cheaper to convert. So when my parents moved from inner Portland in 1962 to Washington County, we moved into a standard ranch home on a slope with a downstairs with a big window, a wet bar, 2 bedrooms. Now, to convert that into a rental unit would be very inexpensive, be great housing, and create, I think, a bigger supply over larger parts of the city. So what I think we're seeing is the beginning of the market. This is the pump priming stage. And what we want to do, and I think all your partners want to do, is to make sure that the opportunity is more widespread, serves more housing needs. And I think there will always be, of course, this question about who's bearing the burden in terms of the infrastructure. But I would agree with Eli that the city was built with infrastructure for a much higher population density in those neighborhoods than currently lives in it.
I'll also add one other comment, because I think this is a fascinating discussion. If the question was philosophically, should we be encouraging the private sector to do certain things that we want them to do by using foregone revenue, I would say that's not my preferred way of doing it. So there is inherent in tax abatements, in tax credits, in waivers of SDCs and other things, there are distortions that in a perfect world we would correct by having enough money to provide a direct subsidy. The direct subsidy route is obviously the most efficient way of doing it, but we don't have the resources to do it, so we use a lot of carrots in our toolkit that result in foregone revenue. The foregone revenue impacts infrastructure, impacts school funding, impacts money available to the county to fund good deeds, impacts our general fund. But we're using the tool, A, because we don't have necessarily a better tool, and B, we've made a judgment that the public benefit outweighs the cost. But even within the tax abatement plan, I mean, we have tax abatements that come before us, and depending on the value of the dirt, the abatement could be worth X versus Y. We pay, the value is more, the hit to the general fund is more in nice areas that have established infrastructure and therefore higher property values. But we make a judgment that investing in high opportunity neighborhoods is actually a positive thing. So in a perfect world, again, I'd rather have the dollars go out through the front door and not the back door, because it does produce some distortions. We don't live in that perfect world, and we have only a handful of ways to stimulate the private sector to do things which we think are our long-term public interest.
And I'd like to be clear that I I share Commissioner Fritz's concerns about who this is benefiting, and that this waiver is only one piece of a much larger strategy, and that strategy must include a lending product. So we can deliver the benefits of RIP as far down the income spectrum as possible. As everyone has noted, you need to have access to capital to develop an ADU. There is no loan product for an ADU. And in simplest terms, what this loan product would do is take into account the rent generated by the ADU, and that would enable much more modest income homeowners to develop ADUs. And I see this as a strategy for people who want to age in place, people who want to get their kids out of their basement, maybe into their backyard. That's kind of my situation. Yeah, just really, he's not in my basement. He's in my second bedroom. But I just
that's cold.
Yeah, but after this, he may want to be in the basement.
Yeah, 1 year till he's 18.
That's cold.
And then it's to the backyard. But I mean, honestly, the ADU will probably be nicer than the main house. Anyhow, it's a low impact way to add density to our single family neighborhoods. And it's also a way to invite average Portlanders to help us solve part of our housing crisis. And that's the most hopeful thing to me. When we talk about the numbers, 25,000 affordable units short, 35,000, however many units we are behind, that is so daunting. And I do the math based on what we're producing now, and I think we might solve that problem in 500 years. Maybe human being, maybe our population will decline and it will happen a little faster, but by breaking it down and giving opportunity to potentially thousands of property owners in our city, it becomes infinitely more doable. And I'm really hoping that we can hit this from every angle and make the most of this opportunity that's coming with RIP.
Could I, since I never like to miss out on a nerdy conversation, do we have good data on what I guess I'll just call the but-for argument? Do we know that if you provide this subsidy, how many additional units it's generating at the margin? Do we have any sense of that?
That question was not asked, Mr. Mayor, in the survey. They just asked if it was important, and you have to deduce based on the relative weight of the SDC waiver compared to the total project budget. That's pretty substantial. My anecdote is, if the SDC waiver was applied, we wouldn't be building our unit. It's just absolutely impossible.
That's fair enough. So on the margin, that certainly made a difference for you.
I think if we can go a little deeper into nerddom, I think the other thing that is some light is shed on is what would be the alternative for the people in the ADUs if they didn't exist? For most of them, it's apartments. And the people who choose to live in an ADU are picking something that's quite different from an apartment, which has some of the attributes and a location like a single-family home, but a rent that's at least in many cases competitive with what it would be for apartment. I think in the future, there are not many families that have children in ADUs right now. It's a small percentage. But school choice is very important. We have a problem with income segregation in Portland Public Schools. It's pretty significant.
So let me stipulate on the demand side, this is a fabulous thing. I'm not disputing that at all. I love ADUs. Eli sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of my thinking. This is the lowest threshold, easiest, politically most expedient way to drive additional housing into what, if I can just use the pejorative, are more, quote, traditional, unquote, neighborhoods. It fits with the character. People don't come in here and get riled up about an ADU. It seems to be broadly accepted as a strategy, and it creates, on the demand side, all these great opportunities that wouldn't be there otherwise. I guess where I was going with this is the marginal value of creating an ADU greater than the cost when you sell your house? I mean, it seems to me from the perspective of a homeowner, it is the economically rational and smart thing to do to build an ADU. because the cost you pay, and you said whatever you said it was, you know, 50 to whatever $1,000, my guess is you get back a lot more than that in additive value when you sell your house. Do you know if that's true or is that false?
It's actually one of the things that in the project we've heard, and Eli's been at this a lot longer than I have, the appraisers don't agree.
Okay.
And I went to speak to some realtors in Hillsborough last month about this, and they asked me for information. I said, I don't think we know yet.
Okay.
But what we can show, and the survey shows, is the payback period on the investment. That return is high. Now, that includes the 26% that are getting short-term rental income, and that's very high. One of the products that will come next from our project will be from the Northwest Economic Research Center, and it will be a kind of pro forma for the homeowners to help them think about this. So that will, it's not going to answer the question about the market, but it will help homeowners make the decision about whether it's a good investment.
So on the equity argument, and then I'll stop, but it was such a great, and it was really good conversation, and I didn't want to interrupt it. I agree that on the demand side, the equity issue is being addressed in any area of high opportunity, provided that the price is right and people are able to afford to come in at various levels of affordability. I do think there's an equity issue on the supply side. If we're providing a government subsidy broadly that is not being used broadly, but is providing additive value to a limited or a select group of homeowners, that is an inequity.
Mayor, can I address that for a sec?
Yeah, please.
Because I want to throw and maybe ask Professor Liberty to comment on this. You said something this morning about us being more intentional about taking the age-friendly framework and applying it to our policy. So let me offer the obvious analogy. The assumption you're making in the question you ask is that we're providing a benefit that increases the value of an asset and that someone potentially gets a windfall when they turn around and sell their house. Let's assume that what we're trying to do is prevent someone from having to sell their house and instead hold on to their house as an asset. Let's take the person that we want to age in place, the elderly couple that can no longer manage a house, that transitions to the ADU and rents out their house so they have a steady stream of income which covers their expenses that allows them to age in place. If that ends up being a byproduct of this, that older residents who would prefer not to sell and would like to keep the house in the family, use the house as a rental stream, move into an ADU and flip the arrangement, it seems to me, if the data supports it, that would be a big win for an age-friendly Portland.
Yeah, I don't disagree. But again, that potential benefit's not available broadly. It's available to those particular homeowners.
I think,
but I don't dispute that. And I mean, for me, this is somewhat of an interesting academic conversation. I support this, but I just want to be clear. It's multifaceted, both on the supply and the demand side.
Mayor Wheeler, I think that's an appropriate question. And if the benefits are accruing mostly to people that already have a lot of assets in their homes, I think you have to think about the policy.
Well, I think we should measure it.
Right. Well, I agree. And I think
Actually, we already have that policy. It's called the mortgage interest deduction.
That's correct.
True. That's exactly right, Nick.
But what I would say is that one of the reasons it's been taken up in those neighborhoods, I think, has less to do, it's not only just the equity, but the intellectual capacity and professional connections people have who are able to do this. That's one, I mean, it's not just the money. It's like a part-time job to do this. And that's something also that we have to address, is there has to be a development of a set of services, some of which can be public, some of which are nonprofit, some of which are purely private and for-profit, to help people to make it really easy. Because most people do not have the time or the capacity to do this right now. That is something that needs to evolve. And I think when we see that, you'll see it spread in other neighborhoods. The second thing is, I think when you come around to reevaluating, you can say, maybe, well, I would say that the impact of the...
Just stop a minute, though, because if we don't have an actual hard sunset, there isn't really an evaluation.
Well, I was going to talk about that, actually.
Go ahead, then, sorry.
I think having an evaluation built into this is logical and appropriate. We are trying to do that with the existing policy as well. And I think the question about who's going to reap the benefits is an important one. You have a lot of tools, though, I think you can have to distribute the benefits more equitably between different neighborhoods.
Well, but we had testimony from Bishop Stephen Holt, who are looking at this very issue in the North-Northeast plan. And they have recommended not moving forward with supporting more additional, well, at least continuing to monitor it. And he cited the very thing that you just said, that people may not be ready to be business owners, that they may not know all the rules about landlord-tenant law, that it's a more significant undertaking if they are going to rent them than just the matter of who gets to build them.
But we're not requiring anybody to do this. And Bishop Holt was referring to, from what I could tell, a small sampling of people that came to a meeting that expressed some hesitation about it. But this is not a forced policy. This is something you can opt in or not.
Well, yes, but we're talking about who gets to benefit from the waiver. It was $8 million of lost revenue in parks in 2017 from the affordable housing waiver and the system development charge waivers. That's a lot of money that could be used for developing new parks in East Portland, where you'll all remember those 3 lovely master plans that we approved that we don't have the money to build. So the waivers benefit homeowners and potentially the few renters who are renting those individual apartments. The people who are burdened are renters in other areas of the city who need the services and who are not going to get them because we're not going to have those $8 million a year.
So we're having all the fun up here. And this has actually been a fantastic conversation. I'll let Commissioner Udaley get the last word, and then we should open it up for some public testimony. Because Carla, how many people have expressed an interest?
I show 7 more.
Very good. Commissioner Udaley.
Well, since it hasn't come up yet, I just want to point out the ADU development will generate tax revenue for the city and the county. And while there is foregone revenue on the SDC side, we have a real issue with maintenance of our parks and our streets, and we can't spend SDC money on that. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it would be interesting to look at, compare the tax revenue versus the foregone revenue on the SDC side.
Yeah, I actually do have the numbers, and it's not significant. The amount of tax revenue you get from them is not enough to pay for the operations and maintenance.
Well, if we were building 1,500 ADUs a year, maybe it would be.
Gentlemen, anything else for right now before we go into public testimony?
If I may,
Yeah,
just
please.
quickly.
Yes, sir.
With regard to the new ordinance that will prohibit short-term rentals, I think it'll be very interesting to see if that shifts the geography significantly. Because I think the inner neighborhoods, which have high demand, the ones where people are building it to serve that need. And with other things that are in progress, I think maybe we'll see a broader distribution. That's certainly my hope and goal.
Very good. Excellent discussion. Thank you. So folks, when you're called up for public testimony, you get 3 minutes. The yellow light will give you 30 seconds. When it is red, please stop talking, because I hate to be the talking police guy. So please wrap it up when you get to your 3 minutes. State your name for the record. We don't need your address. Please do let us know if you're a member of a lobbyist organization. That's required by council rules. First 3, Carla.
Are Joe Robertson, Robert Bergen, and Tom Miller.
Thank you for being here.
Tim Miller, I'm
It was the
sorry.
longest 30 minutes of my life.
You should have been here earlier today.
Yeah, that's interesting. How do we do this, one at a time?
Yes, sir, one at a time. And the mics sound like they're on. I don't know if Carla can see the light. Very good. And we find out that about 6 inches away is sort of ideal.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right, my name is Bob Bergen. I am a 30-year general contractor in Oregon, mostly in Northeast Portland. I'm presently a volunteer for Habitat International. I'm a post-disaster construction superintendent. And I'm also the liaison between the state VOAD and the State Services Office of Habitat. I have a piece of property that I've been wanting to build 2 600, 800 square foot permanent homes on, which technically, in my opinion, that ADU doesn't cover that, but that's what you're calling it. And I'd be glad to do it. I've taken plans into the city twice and been told that the one on the right, there would be no development fees, and one on the right, on the left would cost me $30,000 to do. And I said, I'm not going to do that. That's ridiculous. So pursuant to that, I think that Development Services should have a whole new office, to a new name, to figure out how we're going to do all of these without development fees. And to answer Commissioner Fritz's question, you know, you're spending a ton of money moving people around that are camping and cleaning up, and they're out there. Every ADU you put in or somebody puts in is going to get one of those people off the streets. You're going to save the money. You can put that into development. I call this do-it-yourself habitat. I'm sure there's a lot of people like myself who, you know, you can't take it with you. I'm not rich, but I would be more than happy to build those units, 400, 600 square foot, make them absolutely off-grid. It can be done if you want to. There's no reason to do it, but we can make them that well, okay? Landscaping so that no one ever has to touch it, right? And rent them, and I would be more than happy to charge a rent commensurate with what it costs me to do it, to where I will end up making no money on it. Now, if you started that office in Development Services and developed a program like this and got the word out and did a little PR, I'm sure that you'd have people come into that office saying, show me how to do it, okay? Just because it's the right thing to do. That's the way people are in Portland, okay? And it'd be a great thing. It'd be a very humanitarian action to do. Let's see, am I done?
No,
okay, the other thing I think you should do, one last thing, and I know this is way over the top. You need to get together with the Attorney General of Oregon and Washington and sue Airbnb. It's a violation of people's property rights. It changes my neighborhood into a commercial piece of property. And I don't think anyone's really looked into this. You know, it's I mean, you know, property rights have been the basis of a legal society since the signing of the Magna Carta, okay? It's a big deal.
Thank you, sir.
You
Appreciate
bet.
it. It's good testimony. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Joe Robertson. I'm owner of Shelter Solutions. I'm a residential builder. Been building, this is the fourth time in the last 9 years that I've testified to this commission concerning this issue of SDCs. And during that time, or during the last 20 years in Portland, I've built over 100 ADUs. So I have a pretty big group of case studies of how they've been used over the years and so forth. I appreciate the commissioners and their support of ADUs in the past, and as Eli said, making Portland really the leader in the nation in building ADUs. I've been amazed over the years of the uses of ADUs and how they can transition from one use to another throughout the life of them and provide all kinds of uses for the homeowners. I do support this resolution and look at it as a reasonable compromise. However, I think there may be some negative unintended consequences. I don't know how it will be addressed as far as providing housing for relatives or friends on a short-term basis, and I hope that it will not do something to prevent that. I have a customer right now, for example. First of all, let me just say I'm not a big fan of Airbnb or short-term rental. A lot of my customers have done it, but not as many as you would think. Most of them are many more uses like aging in place, like exactly this case study that you said. I've done 4 or 5 of those like that, and a lot of good uses. So it's a small percentage that's been Airbnb, or that are Airbnb now. I have one, however, right now I'm going to be completed with in about 30 days. And she is building it primarily for her and her husband's parents to live in part-time. For her to be able to do that and provide that for them part-time, she has to rent it out as an Airbnb part-time to cover her costs. That's one example, and she told me today when I told her I was coming here, I would not be doing this if I couldn't supplement my income and cover my costs with a short-term rental. Another one that was just featured in the Oregonian about a month ago in North Portland, they use it as community meetings, neighborhood meetings, community, and let other neighbors use it for their guests. They have to rent it out 2 weeks out of the year or 2 weeks per month to cover their costs. So neither one of those would have built that ADU if they would have been prevented from doing that. So I think it's something that should be thought about. All in all, though, I support the resolution, and I thank you for your support.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, thank you so much for the chance to talk with you today. My name is Tim Miller, and I run an organization called Inhabit. You heard it mentioned earlier this afternoon. We're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to create social impact through better living spaces. And we were started just across the hall here back in 2009, 2010. You may know us for doing thousands of energy efficiency projects. We've helped about 5,000 families improve their homes. You may know that we've done seismic work to upgrade and improve the resilience of homes. Recently, we've worked in the floodplain to help reduce folks' insurance costs and help stabilize those families. And we're also the organization working with the county and with the Joint Office of Homeless Services to build the 4 pilot ADUs to help create housing for some homeless families. We all know that we are in a housing crisis, and ADUs are not the solution to the problem. We need multifamily buildings, we have shelters, we have dozens of nonprofits working on this. We're helping people stay in homes by improving those homes, a range of efforts, but ADUs can be a huge part of that range of solutions, as you all know. We see ADUs addressing homelessness, like in the units that we're building now, with programs wrapped around those construction projects. ADUs address low-income housing. ADUs can help folks stay in their homes, as we discussed earlier. ADUs can be a solution for aging in place and can be built ADA compliant. ADUs can give folks access to neighborhoods they would not otherwise be able to access, opportunity neighborhoods, as we've talked about before. And they're a path to gentle density, is how our colleagues in Hood River are thinking about ADUs for them. We're working with dozens of partners on this effort. Mr. Liberty from the Institute for Sustainable Solutions and Eli are a couple of our friends and colleagues working on this effort, dozens of other groups. There's a whole team of nonprofits and other organizations working on a build small approach. How do we do all this work? We're aiming to, at Inhabit, we're aiming to get units down to $100,000 to $125,000 to build them. But when you think about that math, then you see that $15,000 to $20,000 of SDCs is 15, 20% of the cost, which is a really big swing. So we also see an importance of having a system that was mentioned in some of the comments to help gather the right contractors, ideally minority and women-owned contractors to the extent that we can do that. Designs, loans, we're working with Craft 3 and others to build and create access to those loan products, as Inhabit has always done, and create the help and process to help folks do this. So that hopefully we can go from 500 ADUs a year to 1,500 ADUs a year and really drive this. Without an SDC waiver, I think that 500 would go down to 100 or 150, back where it was before we had the SDC waiver. So we're really looking very closely at this, and SDCs are waivers are a fundamental platform on which we can build all these other programs to get at the issues that you all mentioned about who benefits and who doesn't. They're a platform.
Thank you. Thanks, all 3 of you.
The next 3 are Schuler Silva, Willie Dean, and Ben Jacklett.
Good afternoon. Would you like to start, sir?
Sure.
Thank you.
Commissioners and Mayor, thanks for having us today. My name is Skylar Silva. I'm the co-owner and founder of Square Foot Studios, a design-build firm specializing in accessory dwelling units and home studios here in Portland. We're also working with Inhabit on the A Place for You project, providing ADUs for homeless. I've come here today to give testimony on the resolution to extend the waiver of the service development charges on ADUs on behalf of our past, current, and future clients, as well as their communities, not on behalf of my company. The resolution, should it pass, would be of great benefit to our company, that is no doubt, but as a design-build firm, we value our clients' needs first. A majority of our ADU clients approach us wanting to leverage their asset of property to create housing, adding a revenue stream for the homeowner. Many uses of our ADUs include long-term rental, serving as a guest house for friends and family, multi-generational living, and occasionally the use of short-term rental services during vacancies to supplement the expense. These above reasons are all win-win propositions. ADUs create additional housing while creating an easily achievable investment with a return for the homeowner. We believe that extending the SDC waiver for ADUs will continue the win-win proposition for homeowners and renters. The City of Portland has been revolutionary in its support for ADUs, and without its continued support, the unique opportunity of investment and increased housing will falter. Square Foot Studios would also like to applaud the City Council for upholding its goal to increase density rather than relying on sprawl. Our city planners must also be applauded for their continuing efforts to maintain the urban growth boundary. Finally, we would like to acknowledge that this resolution is in response to a nuanced issue that requires continuous, thoughtful solutions. Square Foot Studios supports continued study and regular review of the issues affecting housing in Portland. As citizens of Portland ourselves, we would encourage the City Council and the affected bureaus to find alternate streams of revenue to fill the gap of the SDC waiver for ADUs. With increased density comes increased wear and tear on our infrastructure, which is already in a state of disrepair. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Willie Dean. I own Ground Up Design Works. It's a residential design business, and we provide permitting services to homeowners throughout Portland and have been doing so for 5 years. In the past 5 years, we've helped plan around 20 ADUs. And I think that, well, let's see, I'm just going to read from this because I'm kind of babbling here. The waiver has been a significant incentive to many of the projects that we work on. Most of my projects wouldn't have been able to get off the ground without the waiver being in place, and I just see it as a humongous benefit to the housing and rental market. The SDC waiver is an extremely successful way to incentivize new, compact, affordable infill housing built throughout the city. We're in the midst of a housing crisis in general and affordable housing crisis in particular. Why take away a successful strategy in the midst of a crisis? The strategy has been great for the community and has put Portland on the forefront of this housing development type in the country. I mean, it's really a feather in the hat of Portland that we have this ADU development model, and people look to us to see what we're doing and find ways to promote ADU development in their communities. And I think that this specific issue has been probably the largest driver in that. So I'm just here to support the extension of the waiver, and I just think it's a really great thing, and it's been good for the housing market. If the waiver expires, we would continue to see ADUs being built, but not at the current rate. One of the last speakers said that, we're at 500 right now, and if we continue forward, we can expect that number to grow, and if the waiver expires, I think we can expect that number to drop significantly.
Great, thank you. Kids, where are you from?
We're from Riverdale Grade School.
Excellent. Welcome to Portland City Hall. You having a good time?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Good afternoon, sir.
Hello, my name is Ben Jacklin. I'm a little nervous with the new audience now, forgive me.
You have an audience.
I'm with YimbyHomes.com, and I would like to encourage the council to extend Portland's bold ADU waiver program. This program is vital to the development of Portland's promising and diverse ADU ecosystem, and it is an integral component of the YIMBY mission to deliver backyard homes that are beautiful, sustainable, and affordable. ADUs represent a creative solution to the housing crisis. We applaud the City of Portland for taking the national lead on enabling and encouraging people to build them. Well-designed ADUs can lower carbon footprints and create livelier, denser neighborhoods without demolition and disruption. The omission of short-term rentals from the fee waiver makes perfect sense to me. I applaud the city for standing firm with its housing objectives. The fee waiver represents a major investment in the housing future of Portland, and it makes sense to invest judiciously.
Okay, thank you.
I believe strongly that this investment will pay off for Portlanders in many ways, including job creation. Thank you for the opportunity to share our support of this resolution.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. We appreciate your testimony. Carla, how many more do we have?
These are the last two who
Very
signed
good.
up. John Bear and Tom Karwacki.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Would you like to start, please?
Sure. My name is Tom Karwacki, University Park Neighborhood Association Land Use Chair. We put this on our website and social media. I think the comments came back from people. 40 comments in less than 24 hours is pretty good dealing with issues on this nature. One, they've requested to keep the record open so that you can actually get some input from people who aren't developers or architects involved with this process. The main issue and concern that people had, and I do too personally, is the clawback workability. So how are you going to actually claw back the $19,000 or whatever the SDC waiver is if someone has to, because of a recession or something else, go out and put it on Airbnb for a certain period of time? There's some 10 years might be too long. The average mortgage is 7 years. So therefore, you're looking at inter-ownership issues, and that would also have major impacts on the appraisal value of any house, and I think it would have a significant impact. You can test that. Third, the city has the opportunity to survey the actual owners. Instead of just making a decision here, you can actually go out and address, this is not a huge population. You can actually send an email or text or a letter and actually survey the people. How important is an Airbnb opportunity to have been an influence on yours? We don't have to just rely on some other studies on that. But the main thing was to keep the record open. I've looked at 25 ADUs within University Park and Portsmouth. 2 are with family members. Most of them are Airbnb. The concern has been that people can age in place. The answer is they can't if they're not designed for ADA capability. We had 4 people at our last meeting come up to me in wheelchairs or in full chairs, and they were talking about ADAs and Airbnbs and the ADUs, and that there are almost none that they could find that were accessible. I've only been in one in North Portland that was accessible. So the whole concern about aging in place is a serious concern, and I think that I would like to see us how we can incentivize these kind of universal design or something like that, whereby we're actually getting some and reaching out to the real people who could be using this in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Daly.
Thomas, I do have some good news for you on the ADA front, which is with the coming RIP. Currently, if a homeowner wants to develop 2 ADUs, one of them will require basic visitability. That means the entrance is accessible, the bathroom is accessible, and there's a area to socialize. I agree, that's a concern of mine, but I would encourage anyone building ADUs who sees it as a strategy to age in place to take that into consideration, because we almost all do eventually experience some kind of mobility challenges.
But how can you incentivize? You're at that point that I think that you might want to look at how you can do that.
Well, the incentive is you don't get to build it unless you meet the visitability requirements. And just to be clear about short-term rentals, the covenant doesn't preclude anyone from building an ADU for the purpose of a short-term rental.
Oh, I understand.
It simply doesn't waive the SDC charges, because we should not be subsidizing someone's commercial enterprise. If we're going to give a $15,000 subsidy to what is essentially an unattended hotel room, why wouldn't we give $15,000 subsidy to a bookstore or a coffee shop? So that, and I heard a couple scenarios which are interesting challenges that I feel like they're worth discussing, and I think that we can get a little more nuanced about that policy, but also you can, if you amortize that cost of the SDCs over a period of years, increase your short-term rental rate a few dollars, you'll recoup your SDCs. So we need people to build real housing, not short-term rentals.
Thomas, can I offer just another observation? We used to provide a bonus for developers that included a green roof. Now it is mandated, and it has become fairly ubiquitous anyway. The market caught up. People understood the benefits of a green roof. Now it's mandated. Between now and 2050, the number of people 65 and older is going to double to 1.5 billion globally. And we're going to have, we hope, if the city continues to be an age-friendly destination, we hope that we are a place that older adults choose to live in and are drawn to. And so my guess is that over time, the idea of universal design will go from being, sort of something we talk about on the margins or, some adaptations, to being something that the market demands. And I suspect in due course, our code will have as a mandate a much higher standard of accessibility. I think it's inevitable.
Very good. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is John Baer. And more than 10 years ago, I bought and resided in a house close to the university here. It's amazing that I'm following this gentleman because I have the same concerns. My age is 66. My income is low enough that I qualify for the property tax, not deferral program, but the state pays my property tax, and upon my demise, there's a bill owing to the Department of Revenue. The only way I can see to afford to live in my house in the future, now that I'm alone in it, is to do a service of short-term rentals to students, which technically aren't short-term rentals at all. They assist the community. My intention is to develop my walkout basement in an accessible manner. Because at 66, I can't depend on using my own 2 feet for the next 10 years. And using my upstairs to provide an income for me as well as housing for students and relieve the load on transportation and other infrastructure. I think that I'm very deserving of a waiver of the transportation systems development charge at least. So what I'm sensitive to is the transition rules that aren't in place in this document. I'm qualifying under the old rules because I'm filing in the next few months. However, I have a firm deadline of 11 months after July 31st to complete. No provision do I see here for being able to qualify under the new rules, having language put on my deed, and I also, the way I read the old rules, I would have to pay the system development charges if I don't get the certificate of occupancy by June 30 next year. So I submitted to council an email to the clerk, the following language: in acknowledgement of the need to transition SDC waiver rules from the existing firm dates to new dates meant to extend the waiver program, this paragraph is proposed to remove ambiguity for many homeowners who have begun their ADU redevelopment on their properties under the former rules. Quote, be it further resolved that council directs all affected bureaus to amend the current waiver of SDCs for new ADUs or the conversion of structures to ADU units to explicitly rescind the June 30, 2019 date for receiving final inspection and certificate of occupancy for those ADU permits submitted by July 31st, 2018. Respectfully, John Baer. Please consider that, adding that to the bottom of this, so we're not in limbo and we'll be caught unawares, either owing a lot of money or seeking a favor from the council next year. If I get injured on the job and I'm doing the rough construction in my own basement, I may, through no fault of my own, be unable to complete. The only trades I'm sending out are electrical and plumbing, because I don't feel I have those skills, and perhaps some finished carpentry. But everything else is, on my dime, pay as you go. So, thank you. That's all I have to ask.
Did you say you emailed that request to us?
Yes, during the meeting I was writing it back here.
Oh, so we've got it in our boxes right now?
What?
We have it in our inboxes right now?
Yes, you do.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Colleagues, Commissioner Fritz.
Yeah, I really appreciate the discussion and the expert testimony, as well as the community partnerships. It seems to me, let me just state, ADUs are a good thing. They have many, many benefits for the property owner, for the renter, for the family member, for the kinds of people that we just heard. So the question is, how can we make this policy work for everybody, or for more aspects? So I'm just wondering, and second of all, I really appreciate, Commissioner Udaley, your establishment of this division of the Revenue and Financial Services Division to administer the covenants and to set up a fee structure and registration, so that actually can be perhaps a model for our what we need to do for other short-term rentals. I'm really excited about that. And when I read that, I started thinking of, well, this could be the way to get to affordability that, I read in Professor Liberty's documents that some of the ADU rents go up to $1,200. That's quite a lot of money. And so potentially, although I heard the caution from Eli Spivak to not have kind of rent-controlled units, is there a potential to have a maximum monthly rent? So that's one thing. We got an email from someone else who pointed out that sometimes people they start off doing the short-term rental in order to pay off their construction loans with the intent of either themselves or a family member moving in later. So I am concerned about how does this affect the affordability. There is the accessibility thing that Thomas Kowalski brought up, and that if we're going to be giving this benefit on an ongoing basis, could we do what Commissioner Fish just said and make it a standard that you have to do it a certain way? And then finally, this is another example of, yes, this is a great policy that benefits housing, that benefits many other issues that the council is working on, and that is detrimental to parks and to transportation. And we know, we get told time and time again in the budgets that parks and transportation have to find new revenue to pay their way, and that people are concerned about lack of parks in underserved areas, about unpaved streets, and the other things that system development charge in transportation pay for. So I'm wondering, when the bureaus come back with their revised ordinances, whether that could be part of that perhaps parks, transportation in particular, should be during the budget process reporting on, this is the amount of SDC waivers, and putting in a request for that as part of the budget. So it's very clear which bureaus are subsidizing which other needs, and how much the council is willing to backfill to meet those needs. Because, I just know about parks, and we have over $300 million worth of improvements that are needed to provide an equitable system. So although $8 million a year is, in the grand scheme of that, not much, $8 million can buy a couple of really nice parks. $8 million can pay for a lot of things that then the general fund is not asked to subsidize. Because eventually, or the property tax payers are not asked to subsidize, so that it reduces the amount that we're going to have to go after in a construction bond, which Parks is going to have to do at some time in the near future. So I think there is a way to do this that meets all of those many more needs. And so I'm just wondering, obviously we're not voting on this week, it's a non-emergency ordinance. It'll come
It's a resolution.
It's a resolution. Well, I'm wondering if there's if there might be merit in doing a short-term extension of the current waiver and looking into some of these other possibilities, considering this after this is passed will become a permanent thing that might not get to the top of the list of a future commissioner in charge.
Commissioner, can I make a comment to that? So the point that you just made about having transparency about foregone revenue and how it impacts the budgets of various bureaus, to the extent that that data is not part of the budget process, I would wholeheartedly support having that be daylit and part of the discussion. And I think that the council should have the opportunity to decide whether there's a general fund backfill for any foregone revenue, where the burdens are spread broadly over infrastructure bureaus, for example, and it has a consequence. And by the way, you know, it could be backfilled with additional capital dollars. I know doesn't have to be the same color of money, but at least it gives the commissioner in charge a platform to argue for some adjustment. So just speaking for myself, I think that is a positive thing. The way I read this resolution is that there's a directive to come back to council by the end of July with code language. It would seem to me that between now and then, we can have a continuing conversation about that issue and about whether we want to have a sunset or any number of things, that adopting this resolution in no way precludes us having the conversation on those or other issues that my colleagues may have.
I guess,
Commissioner Saltzman.
Yeah, I was impressed with the very thoughtful testimony as well as the council discussion on this. So there's a couple things that I'm concerned about, or not, maybe not concerned, but I'd like to see us look at in more detail. And maybe that is in the ordinance, but I'm intrigued by the idea of making universal design sort of more of an incentive, that perhaps we, grant X percent of a waiver and, increase that X by more if it's universal design ADU. I think that is an incentive that makes a lot of sense. So I'd like to see us explore that. I don't know if I need to offer an amendment now or whether we can deal with that in July. And then the issue that Mr. Baer just raised about some of the transition, I think we need to make sure that we're clear. The transition from the old waiver to a new waiver. I just think we need to make sure people like Mr. Baer, who have some legitimate concerns and need sort of a planning horizon, that we provide that planning horizon. So those are, I guess, two thoughts I have.
So as far as universal design, which I'm definitely enthusiastic advocate for, I don't know that this is the best tool to address it through. I think that maybe, well, it's definitely something that we could get to in the RIP. Sorry, I've lost track. There's so many questions right now. As to people who are in process now, yes, I'm open to that. We're seeing a slowdown right now just because people know that this waiver is going to end, and there's not really enough time to begin a development process. That's why we're bringing it now, because we want people to keep going rather than come to complete stop and restart. Trying to hit all I was a little confused by the last testimony about student housing. I don't believe that would be considered a short-term rental. We're really talking about people who are advertising their units on short-term rental platforms as vacation homes. But that's something that we should look at a little more closely. How do we define short-term rental? I know, the current rules for offering a short-term rental is the residence needs to be owner-occupied for 9 months out of the year, which happens to coincide with the length of a school year. So I don't think providing student housing would be precluded under this covenant.
Okay.
I want to just caution my colleagues on something. We currently have a waiver that has no conditions. we have a sunset of that waiver, and Commissioner Udaley is proposing an extension of that waiver subject to more restrictive requirements. So, I mean, we are free to put all kinds of new conditions on this, but we also may end up creating a situation where it's no longer a viable option. The heart of this is directing that bureaus come back with language that would allow the continuation of the waiver subject to the limitations set forth in the be it further resolve. So the public benefit has now been more sharply identified in this resolution. It seems to me the council can decide at any time to further sharpen the public benefit, narrow the scope of this. I would caution us not to do that today, because the ultimate goal in this, the question before us from my point of view is, do we want to extend this waiver or not? This actually limits the extension of the waiver to a much more specific case. Council may or may not agree with that. But I think if we start putting other conditions on, we're getting ahead of what I think should be the process. If we think universal design should be put in, I think we should evaluate it. And we should decide whether this is the right vehicle, RIF, or some other proposal.
Commissioner Fritz.
The challenge, though, I'm wondering just of the logistics about this, is the intent that there will be a model amendment under the be it further resolved. There's 5 bureaus that are required to put something in about the covenant.
Restrictive covenant.
Will it be your intent to provide model language for that from Development Services?
Yes.
And where would we then get to the discussion of requiring universal accessibility? Because
what we can do,
there isn't even visitability except in a second ADU. Is that correct in the residential infill project?
That's correct. I honestly don't think that's something that we're really prepared to figure out today. I'd like to call a vote if that's possible.
It seems to me the council can direct planning and the Bureau of Development Services at any time to come forth with options for expanding universal design. And we can look at it as carrots and sticks or something in between. To graft it onto this, which is essentially an extension of the sunset, without knowing the impact of that decision on cost and on whether someone would take advantage of this program, I personally think is a mistake.
All right, so I think we've all heard the ins and outs and the nuances. I'm going to call the question. Please call the roll, Carla.
Fish?
Very good discussion from my point of view, and the issues that have been raised about the impact, particularly on infrastructure bureaus and ratepayer bureaus, is real and important. This notion of foregone revenue is not my favorite way of getting at council priorities, but it is one of our tools. I agree that it needs to have a clear public benefit, and I agree that it has to be carefully monitored. The substitute resolution has some things that I really like, which includes something that Todd Lofgren in my office discussed with Commissioner Udaley's office about collecting data annually about rents charged at ADUs that receive the waivers so we can continue to monitor this program. This requires bureaus to come forward by the end of July with some code language. It then gives us a second opportunity to discuss further refinements. And there's a number of things which have been raised in this hearing that I would like to see us discuss, either in the context of this or separately, particularly around universal design and how we can accelerate the movement towards having more accessible units, either through mandates or through incentives. Thank you, Commissioner Udaley, for bringing this forward, and I appreciate that a number of people have said to us today that Portland has a chance to be a leader in the area of accessory dwelling units. And that is, I think, very important for a number of reasons, not the least of which is it is another way of addressing our significant shortage of affordable homes. So thank you. I vote aye.
Saltzman?
Well, I do, I will support this, but I do want to express the sentiment I just expressed a few minutes ago, is that I intend to develop language for the ordinance in July that will accord some priority to units that have universal design. I mean, advocates for universal design are always on the outside knocking to get in, and we do little bits here and there, like the residential infill project. If you build a second ADU, it's got to have visibility. You know, that's not enough. We all benefit from universal design. We all will, and those who are challenged right now will benefit from having another living option that they can take advantage of. So I will provide some language in July that will provide some incentive. I can't articulate it exactly right now, but I think it would be, maybe you only get 90% of the waiver, 80% of the waiver if you build a standard ADU. If you build universal design, you get 100% waiver. But I think we have to start putting some teeth to our talk. And this is one way I commit to do exactly that. And I will be coming forward with an amendment. I'll be discussing it with all of you in July. But, it's no longer sufficient for people with disabilities or people who want to age in place to sort of always be on the outside of the issue, knocking on the door to get on the inside. Let's put them on the inside to start with. And then I do have, and I intend to support this because I do think ADUs are a positive contribution with the conditions of this resolution for more affordable housing options. But I will say that I do have concerns in general about making something permanent, anything permanent. So I do think it's incumbent upon us, the future councils, to really scrutinize this very closely, both for its impact on our infrastructure bureaus, but also just to make sure that this is still the part and parcel of the goal of solving our affordable housing crisis. If it somehow changes on us in the midstream, then we need to be able to claw back that benefit. Aye.
Udaley?
Well, thank you everyone who came today and gave testimony, and thank you to my colleagues for a lively conversation. It really feels like we don't get to do this often enough. I certainly appreciate everyone's passion around universal design. As many of you know, my son uses a wheelchair, and I have faced a lot of challenges in finding safe, affordable, accessible housing. So it's of great interest to me. I just want to make sure we take the time to get it right and that we put it where it should live, and I'm not convinced that it should live with this waiver. I want to specifically thank Matt Wickstrom and Kimberly Talent, Rebecca Esau, and the whole BDS team for developing this policy. Thank you to Treasurer Cooperman, Director Lanham, and the Revenue Bureau team for helping develop an enforcement mechanism and for being willing and able to administer it. Thank you to Robert Liberty, Beth Glidden, and the ISS team for convening a dream team of stakeholders that's helped shape this policy and our region's approach to ADUs. And thank you to Eli Spivak and others who were here today to give testimony, expert testimony on ADU development. Thank you, Todd Lofgren from Commissioner Fish's staff, who came up with a brilliant idea of collecting rental data from properties that receive waivers. It's cute how excited staff get when they get a shout out in council chambers. So you're welcome, Todd. And thank you to staff from Parks, PBOT, Water, and BES, who have to do the work that this resolution directs. I'm excited to get to work on the next steps. Aye.
Sorry, Mayor, we have a clarification we moved and seconded the substitute.
Correct.
But we didn't vote on accepting the substitute, and I think this vote is for a final. You're taking now?
That's correct. We need to vote on taking the substitute. So let's do this. Go backwards. Don't vote yet, Chloe, Commissioner Udaley. Go backwards and vote on the substitute amendment to accept it.
Right, sorry.
And we'll just take the roll call.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Very enthusiastically support the amendment. Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye, thank you. The substitute's on the table. We're back to the main motion. Commissioner Udaley, continue.
I believe I voted aye.
Very good.
And
We need
moving
two more
right
votes.
along.
Okay, we need to do
And so now we're on the
Fish.
main motion. The
Right.
substitute motion is amended.
Yeah, Fish.
No, I've already cast my, I thought we were going back to where we started.
I
You wanna do it again?
I interrupted the vote on the
Carla,
main
do you want to
motion.
do the whole vote over again?
We don't want the speeches over again.
Oh, but I have a new one already.
Legal counsel, I believe I have the ability to suspend the vote midway through, so that
Yes.
was the vote on the main motion and the commentary on the main motion. So now we will continue the votes that have not been cast on the substitute motion, correct?
Hearing no objection.
I want to make sure legal counsel doesn't object.
Hearing no
That's the
objection.
only objection I care about.
Mayor, I think because the substitution wasn't before the council, it might be good to just hear the votes of each council member I don't think
Very
they need
good.
to
So why
reiterate
don't,
their
we'll start
comments,
the main motion again, but we don't need to hear the speeches twice that have already been given.
Fish.
So I was at a press conference the other day, and I gave a great speech, and a reporter came at the very end and said, "I'm sorry I missed it. Could I hear your speech again?" So she put a phone in front of me, and I gave the same speech from memory. So, but I won't bore you with this time. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Thanks again, everybody. Aye.
Fritz.
It's the longest I've ever had to wait between Commissioner Udaly's vote and mine. I appreciate the discussion. I do appreciate the amendment. I'm in the same place that Commissioner Saltzman is, and will be, if I'm fortunate enough to be in charge of any of the infrastructure bureaus, I'd love to partner with you on bringing something back in July. I'm concerned about the time frame in July, that we would have to make the decision July 1st. I'm not quite sure when the council hearings go. I'm always I don't like being put in the situation where I have to vote for something as an emergency ordinance, even if I don't like it. So that makes me very nervous to not know exactly how that's going to weigh in. And so I think we could be missing a big opportunity to provide this incentive, to provide this benefit, and then missing out on other things like accessibility and affordability. And I'm very concerned that there wasn't much public process outside of those who are most concerned with this proposal to get input from those who have done it in the past and the neighbours in general. So regretfully, I vote no.
Wheeler.
I want to thank everybody for the hard work on this. I thought it was a fantastic conversation. It was detailed. I think we heard a lot of different perspectives, and I appreciate that, and I respect that, and I'm proud to be part of a body where we can actually have that kind of a conversation. I'm intrigued by the idea that Commissioner Saltzman has raised. I, too, think that's ambitious between now and July, but it can be done. And I would certainly be interested in keeping abreast of that, because I do think the universal design concept is a really, really solid one, and I'd like to see us ultimately move in that direction. But as for the matter that's before us today, thank you, Commissioner Udaly, to you and your team for your hard work, to the bureaus that were involved. I vote aye. The resolution, the substitute resolution, is adopted. Thank you. Next item, 427.
Amend the 2035 Comprehensive Plan map and amend the official city zoning map to carry out Portland's 2035 Comprehensive Plan.
Colleagues, we're here for further deliberations on the council amendments to the map reconciliation project. The written record was reopened following the last council session on April 25th and closed on Monday, April 30th at 8 a.m. We do not expect to take any further public testimony today. Staff have prepared the appropriate as-amended substitute ordinance and exhibits, which were distributed to council last week. Today, the council will vote on the amendments number 12, 17, 19, and 53, which were moved and seconded on April 25th, 2018, and then vote to accept a substitute ordinance and exhibits. Council will take a final vote on the ordinance and exhibits on May 24th, shortly after the new 2035 comprehensive plan is in effect. We have BPS staff here, Eric Ainstrom and Mary Stockton. Please come forward and guide us through. One moment. Stop. I have to take a sidebar.
They are right now.
All right, where was I? Good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having this session. Appreciate it. Okay, I think we're ready.
So, are you giving us a presentation?
Yeah,
I feel like I'm being teed up for a
Okay,
presentation.
sorry, thanks, I appreciate that.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Go with it.
Okay, so today, just to establish the action before you, we have a council deliberation and vote to move to the second reading for the amendments number 12, number 17, number 19, and 53. We are also, my understanding is that there may be some new amendments, 54 and 55, based on testimony. And then council will vote to accept a substitute ordinance and exhibits and move to second reading on May 24th.
So, colleagues, before we move on, I had a question. I had believed there would be a motion to table number 19. Is that true or no?
Yes.
So, Commissioner Udaley has requested that we table number 19. Is there any objection?
And that means it's being withdrawn. No, means it's being withdrawn.
Well, my understanding is it was going to be carried over, so there's definitely...
What do you mean by being tabled?
We can do either. We can carry it over to May 9th at 2 p.m. We have a time certain slot available. Is that what we were discussing?
You'll move the substitute.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
May 24th.
Hi, Michelle Planbeck, staff to Mayor Wheeler.
Thank you.
We will go ahead and move the substitute, and that's later on in the script, to May 24th. Amendment 19, which is being discussed right now, would also be continued to May 24th.
So we would not make a final decision until May 24th? I mean, we wouldn't even make a tentative decision until May 24th.
So I can also have staff. This is Lindley Reese, City Attorney. This is an emergency ordinance, so it certainly can be amended and adopted on the same date.
But it can't if we don't have unanimity.
Correct.
Well, on a controversial issue like this, it seems highly unlikely that we're going to get to 5-0. So I don't think that works.
Well, then it's not amended.
So my suggestion would be that today, if the only thing, and I'm presupposing based on what I've heard, is the only thing that council is not in agreement on is number 19 right now, that you would go through, and I'm looking at Marty Stockton's number 12, number 17, number 53, number 54, number 55. You would go ahead and adopt the substitute ordinance and exhibits, and then you would leave to whichever date you want number 19, if you choose not to take that up today.
And so I understand, because this was already extremely complex from a procedural perspective before we got to this. So just so I understand, then 19 would be moved to a different date for further deliberation. Is that correct?
That's up to council, but at this point, it has been moved. At least a version, possibly two versions of 19 have been moved and seconded, so they're available for council to vote on today should they choose. Also, the others, 12, 17, 53, have also been queued up by being moved and seconded.
Mayor, may I jump in for a second?
Commissioner Fish.
So from a slight distance, this is what I understood was being considered. We have to adopt the substitute, and we have the right to take an item out of the substitute and simply defer adopting that. So if it is the council's desire to pull 19 out and adopt the substitute, we can do that, and then the substitute goes forward to the 24th. The question that I understood was still open, because you were not here, Mayor, for the last hearing, is whether you and Commissioner Udaley would like additional time to consider options around Amendment 19. Commissioner Fritz has pointed out the peril of putting that to the last day. So what I would suggest is that if we are going to set that over, not table it, but set it over, we do it at some date, at least a week before the 24th, so the council can have a discussion after you and Commissioner Udaley have had a chance to have further discussions and make a recommendation. I think that's what was intended. If I'm wrong, staff will correct me.
I'm getting hand signals on a date. And what date is that, Michelle? I can't quite make it out from here.
We're looking at moving it to May 9th at 2 p.m. time certain. Would that work for council?
And then what are we moving? Is it just a vote only on the 9th?
On the 19th, on
For the
Amendment 19.
Just
Yeah.
Amendment 19 prior to the substitute vote on the, for the vote on the substitute ordinance, the body ordinance, that's the emergency that you'll be talking about. That's on May 24th, already scheduled, time certain. If you'd like to discuss Amendment 19 prior to that date, which I think was what Commissioner Fish was speaking to, there is some time on the agenda available on May 9th at 2 p.m.
So could I ask why are we, what's the purpose of not doing it today? The hearing was continued to today. We've got dozens of people here who'd like to listen to what we have to say about it. What's the purpose of delaying it till next week?
So I'm ready to go today. Let's go today. And let Commissioner Udaley, what is your thinking?
It was my understanding from the mayor's office that you wanted to continue it, that there were...
Let's clarify this. Can we take a 5-minute recess, please? just a moment.
Actually, I'm going to take this moment because I was a little rushed getting up to the dais to just introduce ourselves, because I think that might help just the audience. So my name is Marty Stockton. I'm the project manager for this, the map refinement project. I'm also the Southeast District Planner, and I'm with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability.
This is Eric Kingstrom. I'm the principal planner overseeing the comprehensive planning program at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability.
Very good. So we're waiting for Commissioner Saltzman. What can be seen once in a minute, twice in a moment, and never in 1,000 years? The letter M.
Not bad. What's the longest distance between 2 points?
Oh, boy.
I don't know.
A shortcut.
A piece of string walks into a bar.
Dan, you missed it all.
I got it.
It was
Did you already
good.
vote?
No, we are not there. So,
okay.
so we will continue where we were. We're going to first move into item 12, which was moved and seconded on April 25th.
So moving into item number 12, Commissioner Fritz's amendment. This is an area that is on Northeast 66th Avenue, just north of Columbia Boulevard. This is an area that is currently a residential farm and forest, but has an industrial sanctuary comprehensive plan map designation. And there have been a series of property owner requests for zone changes to the industrial zone. And this is something that staff is supportive of, and this particular minor amendment, the reason why it's carried over was because there was an additional property that was added to this request.
Very good. Any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll on item 12.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Motion passes. Now we have before us item 17, which was moved and seconded on April 25th. And if you could provide the summary, please, on number 17.
Correct. So this is a request from the Portland Housing Bureau on a site that was formerly owned by the Water Bureau, which is now transitioning to the Housing Bureau. To the north of Syracuse, there is an area that is zoned R5, but has a comprehensive plan map designation of R2. So that would be a zone change. The area south of Syracuse is currently zoned and comped R5, and so that would be both a comp plan map amendment and a zone change amendment to R2. We did hear some testimony from University Park on their concern regarding a recently designated heritage tree, a sequoia. And that was one of the reasons why it was held over until this date. I don't know if there's Commissioner Fritz or Mayor Wheeler, if there are any comments that you want to make on this particular.
Nope, I'm ready to go. Commissioner Fritz?
I just need I have had discussions with Shannon Callahan in the Housing Bureau. So basically, Mayor, as the Housing Commissioner, I'd like a assurance from you that the heritage tree and access to it will remain when there is a development
I
there.
will chain myself to it. I will protect it with my life.
Thank you.
And you have my word here in public. Carla, please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaley.
Things get real fun around here at the end of a long day. Aye.
Fritz.
And I do have comments to that effect from the Housing Bureau. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. 17 is adopted. Now we will consider item number 19. And there are currently 3 options before us. Commissioner Udaley, I believe you have a comment with regard to your amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for being here today, everyone. I want to explain the confusion a little bit. The mayor was out last week. The record was unexpectedly reopened, and then I was out, and so we hadn't had a chance to connect, and I think our staff's got our wires crossed. First, I want to say I am in general support of the Alberta Alive development. the developer and all of the people involved are good actors in our affordable housing development community. And I was really excited by the potential that this lot offered. However, I have deep concerns, I guess procedural concerns about how this came about. You guys are distracting me. That's okay. I should be, usually people are screaming obscenities, so this is nothing.
Don't give them any ideas.
I expect flowers. No. After talking to BPS and getting a greater understanding of the specifics of this particular lot, I have decided to rescind my amendment. I want to say, okay, no clapping, twinkle fingers. I do want to say that we as a city are looking at lots just like this one. We are in conversation, active conversation. I think we're funding some kind of study. In conversation with faith communities who have dwindling membership and are land rich, how best to utilize those properties. So this could be reconsidered in the future. I can't promise you that that this won't ever happen on this lot, but I'm not comfortable enough with this current proposal to move forward. I also want to say I'm frustrated by what blunt tools our zoning codes offer us, because there really was no middle ground between R1 and the CM2. And I think a lot of the concern expressed by the neighbors was the height, the 5 stories, and the commercial. And the developer didn't necessarily need to have that commercial floor and could have limited it. But there was no way that we could guarantee that. We can't actually say, here's your new zoning with some restrictions. So my staff is going to be looking into creating some kind of affordable housing zoning where we could bring more height and units without having to add in the mixed use. So just want to make sure that I covered all the bases. I do want to say initially in the first round, 40% of the comments we got were in support. So there really was support, and there was support in your neighborhood. The second round, about 4% of the comments were in support of this development. So it was suggested that my office wasn't being honest about what we were hearing, and we were, and I just felt the need to say that because I don't like my staff to be cast upon them. We really were listening to everyone. And finally, I'm going to keep my amendment on the, is it the Hicks property? They still would like R1 zoning. And in conversation with BPS, they did feel like this was a natural progression of zoning in this neighborhood, and that there actually is a plan to dig deeper into the, oh, no, I'm getting thumbs down. Well, you know, it's a compromise, everybody. So that's where we're at.
So thank you, Commissioner Udaley. She has withdrawn her amendment on 19, and I agree with you. I think there was a communications cross wire there, and I want to take ownership for that on the part of my team as well. So thank you for that. We got it all cleared up. Sorry for the 5-minute delay on that. We are going to take a vote on option 3 in a moment, which is Commissioner Fritz's amendment, but I wanted to let you guys do your overview with that new context in mind.
Great, thank you. So I don't know if I'll just quickly state what option was just for clarity in the room. So option one was for the surface parking lot to the north to go to CM2D, and then the church property to the south to go to R1. Option 2, which is the Planning and Sustainability Commission's recommendation from November of 2017, and would be the default if option 3 does not pass, would be only R1 on the surface parking lot. And again, the church building was not part of their decision.
Very good. Further discussion
No.
before I call the roll? Commissioner
Are you-
Fish?
Aren't you going to tell us about R3, option 3?
I can.
Why don't you, if you could complete the three options, I
Okay,
think it's
sure.
helpful.
So option 3 is Commissioner Fritz's amendment to Amendment 19, and it is R1 on the surface parking lot and R1 on the church building. And the rationale for the inclusion of the church building in this map change is that with a multi-dwelling zone, if the church becomes either a national or a local landmark, historic landmark, then it can go through what's called a historic incentives review, and the use can become non-residential. So that's something, it's a path forward for the church.
Very good. Any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll on option 3, Commissioner Fritz's amendment.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Fritz.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Daly, for withdrawing your amendment, and thank you to the neighbours who have informed me on this and have said that, yes, we can have more density, and this is what this amendment does. I was very tempted to just say, let's leave it with what the Planning and Sustainability Commission said, which was R2.5 on this lot. So let the record show that the neighbours said, yes, we're okay with having R1 density, and I do believe, thanks to Marty Stockton, that this will help preserve the historic Abbey, and I appreciate that, and I hope that will happen. Aye.
Wheeler.
So I definitely want to thank those who have expressed an interest in increased density. I want the housing. I really want the housing. And as you heard me say a few days ago, we can't say we're for affordable housing but not in our neighborhood. And you have stepped up and said you are willing to accept more density and more housing in your neighborhood. Where I think people got squeamish on this was the idea of also introducing a commercial enterprise into an area that is not commercial. It is between MLK, which is commercial, and Alberta, which is commercial, but this area in and of itself is not a commercial neighborhood. So I think this is a very, very smart compromise. It is pro-housing. I support it. I vote aye. The amendment is adopted. Thank you. Item 54.
53.
I'm sorry. We have before us item 53, which was moved and seconded. This one was also on April 25th. We'll be voting on this. I don't know if you wanted to give a description of item 53.
Just very briefly, this is the residential property just to the north of the surface parking lot, currently zoned R2.5, and there's been an amendment to R1 on this property.
Very good. Carla, please call the roll.
Could I speak to
Commissioner
it,
Fritz.
please? Thank you. This is a neighbourhood that's been adversely impacted by council's decisions for decades. And so I think it's particularly important that we not make a hasty decision on this particular lot. I would be fine leaving it with its current zoning of R2.5. If the council wants to support Commissioner Udaley's amendment, I would suggest that a fairer way to do it would be as a comprehensive plan designation rather than a zoning change, and apply it to the whole block so that all the property owners, this particular family has brought it to Commissioner Udaley's attention that they would be impacted, although they asked for it at the time that they thought it was going to have commercial zoning next to it. The difference between R2.5 height and R1 height, R2.5 is 35 feet, R1 height is 45 feet. So that's not that much of a difference. I don't think there's going to be that much of an impact on the Hicks property. If there is, then it then continues on down the line to the rest of the block. So if we're going to do anything on this block, I think we should do it on the entire block, and I would suggest we do it as a comprehensive plan designation rather than just changing the zoning. My preference would be to reject this amendment, and looking at the Abbey and the parking lot, that's the one that prompted all this debate. And at some point, we've got to say stop, and this is what's been on the table. Putting another amendment on the table now, I think just continues down the line of turmoil. And so I would encourage my colleagues to vote no on this.
So I'm open to the suggestion that you just made, but I'd need some clarification on it. But I do want to let my colleagues know that we have been in conversation with Mrs. Hicks, and Mrs. Hicks's preference is that nothing happen on this lot, and I told her that that was not on the table, and she expressed desire to leave. She doesn't want to live, she's 83 years old, she's lived there for 45 years, she doesn't want to live through the construction of a multiple-story development, and she would like to realize some benefit from what is happening in her neighborhood. Marty, could you talk about both, I guess, BPS's intention of looking deeper into neighborhoods off of these corridors and rezoning for multifamily?
Yes.
What would be possible on that lot, given the size, and if it were R1? And then what Commissioner Fritz's amendment would functionally mean to the family or future developer?
So there's a lot that you just kind of laid out there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to kind of unpack that a little bit. So first of all, I would say that, this segment of Alberta is a neighborhood corridor on the urban design framework. It's also within kind of inner Portland. So this is an area that there's been a lot of testimony that there should be higher density along this area. And I would agree that in the future, through a future area plan, that this is a segment that there should be conversation about whether or not R2.5 is the appropriate zoning, and if not, what would be. And also looking at kind of a larger area, not just piecemeal lot by lot. Getting to kind of the second component of what you were wanting me to share with you is that currently the R1 zone on a 5,000 square foot lot, the density is a range of 3 to 5 units. So oftentimes what we would see is we would see a conversion of an existing house into a triplex. If the house is demolished, then we could see up to a 5-unit building on a 5,000 square foot lot. That, I would say, has to be asterisked with the fact that we are currently, we have a legislative project called the Better Housing by Design that is moving away from a density, maximum density, to a form-based, where a structure could be 60% building coverage, setbacks up to 45 feet in height, and that the number of units are similar to our mixed-use zones, where it's more on building code, not so much on a maximum density. So that's something to just be aware of as we're moving forward in this conversation.
And I think that also gets to some of your comment earlier, Commissioner Daly, about the bluntness of the current zoning tools, that Better Housing by Design project is an avenue for us to look at how can we get some building massing that approaches the mixed-use zones without that commercial element for housing projects, and that's part of what we're looking at in that project.
Yeah, I mean, I want to point out this is a very large home. It's 6 bedrooms. It's home to 3 households. It's an intergenerational home. And currently, well, I guess when RIP comes, it could be turned into a duplex, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, with the R2.5 zone, that is an attached single dwelling zone. It can be converted to a duplex right now.
So it could be converted to a duplex, but this home is big enough to be a triplex or a fourplex. Of course, what we would want to see is that existing home preserved and turned into more units, but we can't guarantee that is what would happen.
The other possibility, since this is contiguous to a lot that we know has some development activities, it could just end up being incorporated into that project. And
right. So What do you think of Commissioner Fritz's amendment?
I didn't propose
Or,
it. I
I'm
didn't
sorry,
actually move
suggestion.
it yet,
I think that the focus of this conversation for, really since it came up before Planning Commission in October to today has really been focused on the surface parking lot and then the church. I think that adding the property to the north does feel a little piecemeal to me. When, as a planner, if I'm looking at an area, I really would prefer to look at it more holistically and look at a much larger area and even determine whether or not the R1 zoning, maybe that's the appropriate zoning on the corridor, but maybe there's a different transition. So there's so many different alternatives that we just cannot put forward today because we have not done the analysis. We have not had those community conversations.
So it would be hard for us to say, like, where do you draw the lines? We haven't had the chance to really look at that.
Well, that's the last time we're going to ask you a question. No, let's take a moment. Let's take a moment to just reflect on what happened. A commissioner asked a highly respected senior staff person in a bureau to offer an opinion on a question that's a close call, that reasonable people could agree or disagree. And we got what we always get when Marty's here, or the team, is we got a superb and clear answer that gives us something to think about and gives us some boundaries around making a decision. And I wish I wish there were more people in our chambers on a more regular basis to witness these kinds of interactions, because this is why I think we are very fortunate to have these jobs.
I thought it was the joke telling that was.
So,
Commissioner Daly.
So changing the comp plan, was that your suggestion? Or
Yeah, but having heard Marty's response, I don't think that's a good idea.
wouldn't,
The implication of a comp plan only change is that the property owner would have to come back through BDS and
Right.
ask for the zoning at their expense.
So Eric, what's the next bite at the apple where
yeah.
this
Yeah,
could be
that's
addressed?
my next question.
What's
Well,
the
I
next
think-
planning
What he said.
exercise where we could take this up?
I think each of our district liaisons, and this actually isn't Marty's district, she's a Southeast District liaison, but each of our district liaisons has a work program over time to look at a variety of issues in their district. And so, and we do intend to do smaller scale follow-up mapping work with each of our districts as going forward. Hopefully this is the last time we're doing, for a while anyway, this citywide look, because it's a lot of work and it's difficult for people to track. So we hope to do some more localized planning efforts through our district liaison staff, and I think you could direct us to look back at this section of Alberta and consider other options just through our district liaison planning program and consider bringing forward some proposals that way. It doesn't have to be through some larger citywide project. It could just be something that our district liaison is asked to do.
So a similar example to that was there was a request to look at the area around 15th and Killingsworth. And so it was kind of a quick response. So that's one thing when the district liaison team isn't mired in 4, 5, or 6 years of comprehensive planning, is that we can be much more nimble and responsive to areas where we want to do a legislative project.
Well, I'm going to rescind 53, but I am going to ask that you do that close examination of that area, including that property, because I want to do right by this neighborhood. I also want to do right by this family, and they're going to be the most impacted by whatever development happens on the lot, and I'd like to see some priority given to them.
That's great. So Mayor, now I move the substitute.
Commissioner Fish moves the substitute.
Don't we have to do the new amendments, or that's what we do right now?
I think we just took up the other.
No, we still have 54 ahead of us.
Yes, 54 and 55.
Yeah, okay, so let's hold off on that, Commissioner Fish. So 53 is withdrawn. We have before us item 54, which is a new amendment to change the the comprehensive plan and zoning map. The item has not been previously brought to council, but was raised in recent testimony.
Very recent. So that is one of the, I think, things that is most painful when we reopen the testimony multiple times is that we always hear these nuggets of testimony that we really want to act upon. And so even though we didn't get this as timely as we would have liked to in the project, it's really an opportunity to look at this. So what this request is this is the block on Williams between Cook and Fargo. And you'll see that in the red, the area of the block is going to CM3D, and we already have some development that is developed there. The blue is going to an RH with a D overlay. So those are areas of the block that would not be able to have a commercial ground floor. So the request from the long-term property owner is that the whole block has the same zoning.
My understanding is the neighborhood supports this.
So this is the Elliott neighborhood. They have not been contacted about this. Yeah.
It's our city. You know what it feels like. It's our city. Folks, please. And did this came up when we kept the record open on those other matters?
Yeah, so exactly. This came in through the April 25th to April 30th timeframe.
But I mean, just in fairness, Marty, didn't we say that the record's open as to the matters that were on the table?
Correct, but we get testimony about, yeah.
So on something like this, where it comes in at the last possible moment, it has not been vetted with the neighborhood association, and while your description makes it sound relatively non-controversial, how do we evaluate it?
Well, there's evaluating it on the technical merits of what the difference is between the RH with a 4:1 FAR versus a CM3D. So there's those comparisons.
I think given the conversation you just had, it would be fair game to also direct us to bring this back another time if the last minute nature bothers you procedurally.
I'm really torn on this one because it is completing the block, so it seems like it was one that was kind of missed as a technical error.
And this is something I just want to, I need to inject this, is that, again, the frustration about the map refinement project is that it is very, it has been very site-specific or property-specific. This block was, it's currently RXD, which is a significant, it's much, I don't know if you have the heights off the top of your head for RX, but it's basically a zone that's only now in the central city. So all areas that were zoned RX were changed to a different zoning in the comprehensive plan process. The areas that are in red, those were developed under the RXD zoning. And so in the map refinement project, we have changed them to the most comparable zoning, which is CM3D. So in all fairness, the properties that are in blue right now, they are currently zoned RXD. So this is a long-term property owner that if they had developed today, they would be at a much higher level of development capacity. So they were effectively downzoned by the city. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring them to a comparable zoning that is what is currently developed on the red. And so that's a little bit of the story.
Can I ask you two questions? Do you view this as a technical amendment?
I do.
Okay. We've not heard, and as of now, we've not heard any objection. Is that correct?
Correct.
If we were to adopt this amendment and then adopt the substitute ordinance, and between now and May 24th, someone came out of the ether and said, you've made a terrible mistake and here's why, we could technically remove it before we vote on the final ordinance. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that is our backstop. And Commissioner Fritz may very well suggest, as she has in past hearings like this, that she would like to have the neighborhood association notified so that if they do have an objection, we had a chance to hear it before the adoption. And if that satisfies my colleagues, I'm prepared to support the mayor's Amendment 54.
I think with it being downzoned too, there's the added twist that they could have a claim under Measure 37. Forget which one.
Most of that is in the single-family realm, but
is it?
But yeah, that could come up in a general sense.
Yeah.
I think generally what happened at this node was that during the comprehensive plan, we did take the density down a little bit with neighborhood support, but then what happened is in the meantime, buildings got permitted while we were in that year. And now we've got just these remnant properties left, and it doesn't really make sense to hold to that scheme anymore.
There's a consistency and an equity play here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Call the roll, please.
So, do we?
This is, I
that's
need
true.
a
We
motion.
haven't-
I move it.
Second.
Thanks. Call the roll, please.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
This one does make sense. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. 54 is adopted. 55 is also a new amendment to change the comp plan and the zoning map. This item has also not been previously brought to council, but was raised in recent testimony.
And just to be clear, it was not raised in this most recent reopening of the public record, but it was raised in the one just prior. And again, when we're reviewing testimony, sometimes it takes us a while to kind of process through it. So really quickly, this right here is the St. John's Wesleyan Church. The lead pastor submitted testimony, as well as the St. John's Opportunity, which is the neighborhood prosperity initiative in St. John's, that it's a Prosper Portland program. In addition, the Community of Hope, which is a nonprofit that provides shelter in North Portland. So they have all come in requesting that the split zone site go from R2.5 to R1 for the ability to do affordable housing. I would note that when we looked at this, we did note that while the church is on St. Louis, there is New York that abuts I'm going to see if I can, this is New York right here. And then if you look at the aerial, there actually is an alley right here. The alley is not developed adjacent to the church property, but it is developed here. So there were, from a connectivity point of view, there were some nice elements to this.
Marty, is this similar to what we did with that church in Southwest Portland?
So the church in Southwest Portland, it's what the Greater Bible Church of Portland, I believe. That was a church that that proposal was actually R2, and the rationale was because there was some environmental zoning, and they partnered with Portland Habitat. But this is an example of where there's the church, the Prosperity Initiative, and the affordable housing provider all coming together to make this request.
Is this a first cousin of what we did at Albertina Kerr?
It is maybe a second cousin, but yeah.
I'm satisfied.
I'll move the amendment.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion?
Well, again,
Commissioner Fritz?
The question is, do we then comp plan the entire block? Because we haven't heard testimony about whether the neighbors are going to be impacted by changing from 2.5 to R1. So we're giving the people who asked and not really considering those who didn't ask.
I would say in this case, since we have an affirmative interest in getting churches to develop property with affordable housing that links the beloved community with the housing in a campus setting, for me, this is distinguishable. Yeah.
And to be clear, the neighborhood is aware of this, whether or not some of the adjacent property owners are, whether all the adjacent properties owners are, I don't know.
We're about to find out. Please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Fritz.
I'm really torn on this one. I think the backstop is what Commissioner Fish said, that if we hear a lot of concern, that we can withdraw it later. I will have to say that I'm going to support it, mostly because I know the people involved and I know that they're very connected with the community and will do the right kind of development to really look after the impacts on the neighborhood. So if this is one where I'm the planning half of me and the community person is a bit at odds, aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. 55 is adopted. Now BPS staff is going to explain the substitute ordinance.
Great. So BPS, we are asking the City Council to move and second and vote to accept the substitute ordinance with a revised Exhibit A-2. Just a note on that, since I did not know the exact outcome of today's vote, I'm going to rush back to my office and finalize Exhibit A-2 and then send it over to the council clerk, as well as a revised Exhibit C. We'll pass the ordinance on to second and final reading on May 24th, 2018 at 2 p.m.
Mayor, I move the substitute with the record Exhibit A-2 and with record exhibit, I move the substitute with revised Exhibit A-2 and with revised Exhibit C.
Second.
Mayor, may I chime in quickly just to make sure we have clarity on the record?
So you want us to clarify the amendment numbers, is that correct?
What I'd like to do, because what was filed was a revised A2, but
Correct.
it has been amended today. And so I'd like you to clarify that so that staff can conform A2 to the amendments you made today. So I would like you to please clarify
I'll say
the
that.
numbers.
So I move the substitute with revised Exhibit A-2 as amended and with revised Exhibit C as amended.
Yes, and I will clarify that the amendments that were made today to A2 are number 12, number 17, number 19, option 3, number 54, and number 55.
Correct.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fish. We have a second. Any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll.
Fish.
This is our penultimate vote. Am I right? One more?
Who knows?
So we're kicking this thing down the road to May 24th.
How long does one stay in purgatory?
We've had a really fascinating couple of weeks of hearings on some really important issues, and we could not do it without superb staff work. So thank you to everyone who is on this side of the table helping us through this. And I appreciate the quality of the discussion with my colleagues, and I appreciate the members of the community who've come out and shared their views and helped us get it right. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaley.
What Commissioner Fish said, aye.
Fritz.
Well, thanks, Marty, especially Lauren King, Lynn Louise. Thanks to all the community members who came out, especially to the young lady who's wearing my T-shirt with my initials on. I really appreciate it. I want one of those. That's very nice of you.
That is
hilarious. This is why I like planning, because I think we're talking about things that really matter to the community, and what we do in this process will make a difference for the next 20 or more years. And so thank you for participating. Aye.
Wheeler.
So I definitely want a woke AF shirt. That's fabulous.
That's not your initials. You can't have one.
You guys need to do a selfie.
I have to get my own? All right, I'll get my own. I vote aye. Thank you, everybody. That was fabulous. So we will continue the as amended substitute to May 24th, 2018. That'll be a time certain item at 2 p.m. Eric or Marty, is there anything else that we need to do?
Don't think so.
Oh, I got to say thank you to Claire Adamsick on my staff, who I forgot once again, but thank you, Claire.
Thanks, everybody. We're adjourned.